All right, we're going to be getting into stuff pretty quickly today. First thing we want to deal with is this one article that I saw from Reason, which is by Robbie Suave, who I like. And this is basically giving a libertarian opinion perspective on the Charlie Kirk cancel culture campaign. So we're going to record this because this is going to be our video. According to Reason Magazine, Charlie Kirk would not have wanted this. Unfortunately, we can't ask him because he's no longer with us. And unfortunately, that is why it is happening. A vast cancel culture campaign is a poor way to honor his legacy. I would submit that perhaps his legacy at this point is going to be the fact that he was murdered for wanting a free speech society. I also would like to preface reading this article with a point that I've been trying to make for a while now, which is we do not live in a society of free speech. I would prefer to live in that society. I would prefer to live in a society where the most horrible, repugnant, abhorrent person can make the most atrocious comments and opinions, and we all live and let live because we value freedom of speech that highly. I would like to say, and I believe we did, used to live in such a society. For the last 10 plus years, we have not. And therefore, the pragmatic solution to this, and I believe as a libertarian, we should be pragmatic. It's why I like the libertarian perspective, is because it adheres to my pragmatism and realism, that the only way to return to a society that values freedom of speech is to adopt the model of deterrence. Cancel culture exists. We cannot put the genie back in the bottle. The only way to live in a world where in which cancel culture is not used is if everyone has access to it. This is, I think, the libertarian perspective on guns quite correctly, which is the only way to have a society wherein which people are not accosting one another is to have one where everyone is capable of defending themselves. And that means we would all have guns. If everyone had guns, the idea of assaulting someone else to rob them, to commit violence upon them, would be not unheard of, but it would be certainly far less because every person would therefore be able to defend themselves. And every person that would accost someone else has to take that into account. Which house are you going to rob? Are you going to rob the house that says, we have guns here and we will happily shoot someone who tries to assault us? Or the one that says, we have, no violence in this home, hate has no home here, this is a gun-free zone? Which one would you rather, if you were a criminal, an evil person, which one do you want to go for? Do you want to roll the dice on getting shot by the gun owner? Or do you want to go, oh, this is a totally safe house for me to rob, they'll have no way to resist? Which one would you rather do? That is unfortunately where we are in terms of freedom of speech in this country and perhaps in the West in general. And that is my preface for this article. Let's read the article. The shocking assassination of Charlie Kirk has caused understandable distress for so many Americans, including not just his fans and supporters, but millions of other people who are rightly dismayed by the prospect of political violence. I am also one of them. That's partly because we just aren't accustomed to it. While it is commonplace for politicians and media figures to warn of violent political rhetoric leading to more actual violence, it remains the case that ideologically motivated killings of national figures are blessedly rare. Again, I second this. I'm very glad that it is rare. However, I will also say it's not according to people not in the US, this is not entirely unheard of. It is rare, though. The targeted attacks on members of Congress, such as Representatives Gabby Giffords, Democrat from Arizona, and Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana, as well as the attempted assassinations of Presidents Donald Trump, Ronald Reagan, and Gerald Ford. I don't want to point this out, but all Republicans, and JFK was murdered by a communist, are memorable because this type of violence doesn't happen very often. This is also true. Kirk's grisly murder, which was captured on video and watched on social media by millions of people, is unusual and profoundly unsettling. Many people are processing their grief in ways that are edifying. Spontaneous vigils hosted by individuals whose lives were changed by him. Kind remembrances of his approach to politics penned by his ideological foes, and so on. Others are not. In fact, many of Kirk's most ardent fans are now engaged in one of the largest mass cancellation efforts of all time. Some Republican legislators, MAGA activists, and conservative media figures are assembling watch lists with the explicit aim of silencing, firing, expelling, and perhaps even criminalizing any and all anti Kirk sentiment. Now, I would be unsurprised if this is true because people overreach. I hope this is not the case. I would like, and certainly what I have seen, let me know in the comments where and how I'm wrong, but everything that I have seen has been essentially the people that are being targeted by this mass cancellation effort are saying things that are either criminal, promoting violence. Hey, do Asmongold next. That is, I'm not saying that. Let me double down here. I am absolutely not saying that. I abhor that. I have just seen other people say it. I'm not saying it. I don't want it. I don't want it to happen at all. People saying things like that are the people being targeted, as far as I can tell. That is what I have seen. I could be wrong, but that is what I have seen. Representative Clay Higgins, Republican from Louisiana, wants to use explicit government pressure to crush anyone who ran their mouth and belittled the gravity of Kirk's death. Top Trump advisor Stephen Miller is vowing some kind of unspecified crackdown on the right's political enemies, and conservative influencers are writing down the names and professions of Kirk's besmirchers and calling their employers. Vice President J.D. Vance, filling in as a guest host on Kirk's show, instructed viewers to engage in unrestricted canceling. When it comes to cancel culture, it is always necessary to draw distinctions and register certain caveats. Criticism is not necessarily cancellation. This is true. And not every person currently under attack for having said something ugly about Kirk is a victim. The First Amendment is a bulwark against government action. It does not mean everyone can say whatever they want and suffer no consequences. If your boss fires you, you aren't being censored, unless the government twisted your boss's arm. That said, it's worth keeping in mind that many commentators, ranging from classical liberals and free speech centrists on the left of center to many folks on the hard right, have embraced a larger view of free speech and cancel culture. It's better to live in a world where people don't get fired or expelled because they tweeted something stupid. Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. I will say, ranging from classical liberals and free speech centrists on the left of center to many folks on the hard right, have embraced a larger view on free speech and cancel culture. I don't know if that's true. I'm not entirely sure. I have seen that. Certainly now we have seen people who are on the left suddenly very concerned about freedom of speech. That is true. Because apparently they are, trying to use that as a shield when they do not hold that as a value. And as I've said, and I will continue to say, freedom of speech is a universal value. If one person does not have freedom of speech, no one does. Because that one person that we all agree, oh, okay, well, that person's despicable. They can't have freedom of speech. Okay, well, then there's no such thing as freedom of speech because now it's just a matter of taste. Now, anyone who you can disagree with, it's not a universal value anymore. We don't hold it as a principle. It's not an ideal. It's just something that, I like to have, but when someone else says something bad, I don't want it anymore. It's either everybody has it or no one does. That's the nature of this value. And yes, it's true that there's a difference between canceling someone for welcoming the death of Kirk and canceling someone for tweeting something homophobic when they were 14 years old. There is also a big difference between canceling someone for justifying violence against Kirk and canceling someone who merely objects to his views, behaviors, and political project. And I would say canceling someone for these specific reasons, saying that, you know what, I disagreed with him. I am a human being, though, and I have a soul, and I can absolutely agree that political violence is abhorrent. And I think this person's murder is, shakes me to my core. It, makes me lose sleep at night. I think it's horrific. You know, but I will still say that I did disagree with, 95% of everything that he said. Certainly, I don't want him dead, and never did, but I will not change my opinion. I do think that I still disagreed with him. That's reasonable. That person should not be canceled. That person should be, afforded the same rights you would any other fellow human being. I think that's completely reasonable, which is why, these things, if, unfortunately, again, as I said, we live in a world where cancel culture exists. We can't put the genie back in the bottle, and therefore its application, at best, should be targeted, should be surgical. Furthermore, there's a major difference between canceling someone in a public facing communications role and canceling someone who is otherwise obscure. Let's consider 3 examples of post Kirk cancellation attempts that aptly demonstrate why caution, discernment, and forgiveness are important. Number 1, Shane Gillis's audio engineer. Students for Trump activist Ryan Fournier attacked Shane Gillis, an anti woke comedian who was himself canceled by the left and subsequently rehabilitated for employing an audio technician who called Kirk a Nazi. Is this who Shane Gillis has running his sound? Asked Fournier. Gillis responded, no, it isn't. On X, he shared a photo of his actual sound guy, an entirely different person, who certainly looks the part of Shane Gillis' sound guy. The tech person identified by Fournier was just a random person who helped with sound for one of Gillis' shows at some point in the past. Gillis probably doesn't get to handpick the camera guy or the sound guy or the janitor or the plumber at every venue he's ever visited. No one does. Being mad at Gillis about this is exceedingly lame, and people are rightly dragging Fournier on X. But this just goes to show how lazy and careless attempts at cancellation can become. Again, this was something the right was well aware of during the heyday of wokeness, circa 2014 to 2022, the last decade plus. Targeting ordinary, working people for unwise statements on social media should be viewed with skepticism. I agree. I agree. Unfortunately, that has not been the case for the past 10 plus years. So, what did you expect? What do you expect? I agree, and I want this to be done correctly because I do not want, just tactically speaking, I don't want someone to overreach, go too far, and hit somebody who is innocent of any wrongdoing because certainly, that person's life will be unfairly ruined. That's not good. I don't want that. I want no part in that. And also, and probably more importantly from the viewpoint of the left, it will be a point of attack while saying, "Oh, see, look at how bad and terrible these people are." Even though for the last decade, that has been what's been happening to, I'll say, our side for the last decade. We're not able to complain about that. That was just, go away. Doesn't care. Doesn't matter. Now, I will also say in this specific example, I don't know if this guy who called Kirk a Nazi got fired. I don't know if he's had any bad things happen to him. I don't know when he said this. Shane Gillis apparently has not been canceled. He's apparently being dragged on Fournier. And again, this is good. This is good. The fact that this person who, sounds off, half cocked, is being shamed for it is good. It is good that this person is saying, no, 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 don't do this. Don't just throw out accusations. Have the receipts. Have the receipts. Make sure your target is legitimate because that's the only way we are going to rise above this and we're going to keep the moral authority. Teachers who don't like Kirk. Conservatives have drawn particular attention to a large number of primary educators who have made ugly comments about Kirk. This is a trickier subject because parents have every right to object to the manner in which their kids are educated. Agreed? The best solution, of course, is school choice. I would also agree. Let families decide which school environments are best aligned with their own values. However, I must also add, we do not live in that world. We do not live in a world where school choice is the universal public policy. And therefore, if you don't want your kids taught by a certain person, unfortunately, the only avenue you have is to call up that teacher's school and say, hey, I don't want this teacher teaching my student. And if you have a legitimate reason and you've got receipts that says, hey, yeah, this teacher was celebrating the assassination of a father and husband because they disagree with her. I don't think I want that teacher anywhere near my children. I think that's a very reasonable thing to say. And you know what? If that school says, you know what, we're going to stand by that teacher, I suppose, hopefully, you have the ability and resources to pull your kid out of that school and get them somewhere else. And if you don't, certainly I think it's very reasonable to completely raise a stink on social media and say, this person's still employed. This is horrible. You have no other recourse. You have no other recourse in how you are going to try to protect your children from this. So I do understand this. All right. Even so, it seems wrong to me to attempt to get a teacher fired for merely saying that she really doesn't like what Kirk stood for. I don't know specifically um, uh, what they've said. This is a case by case basis thing. Some of these teachers probably just said, I disagree with him, hands off. Okay, unless of course they've called for cancellations in the past, in which case I would go, all right, well if they've called for people being banned and censored and canceled in the past, then unfortunately they are engaging in you know violent acts against your livelihood, and it is self-defense to employ it against them. This was the case with a first grade teacher called out by libs of TikTok, the ultimate social media scalp hunter, who said the teacher described Kirk as a gross, racist, awful person who fueled the fires of division. Dot 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 ellipses. Please stop acting like he was some hero. The ellipsis cut out this important disclaimer. He didn't deserve to die, but I will say this is important. This is the bare minimum, and I'm happy to accept the bare minimum. But I understand why someone would say this, a gross racist, awful person who fueled the fires of division, kind of does seem like a justification for why he might deserve to die. The fact that they at the very least put this in there is the bare minimum of effort. And again, as I said, I'm willing to accept the bare minimum of effort. There are plenty enough people who are not even doing that. Go after those people first. If a parent does not want their child to be educated by someone who dislikes Kirk, we should support any and all policies that would make it easier for that parent to enroll their child in a different environment. I agree. Are those policies on the books? Are they on the board? Are they up for discussion? Are they up for debate? Are they at all a possibility? If they are, then yes, support those policies, get after them. Those are the things you should be going with. Those are the things that are going to better impact you and your children's lives in the long term. Go for that. Ignore the Charlie Kirk comment cancellation stuff. Absolutely. If they're not, and your only option is to be a canceling Karen, then unfortunately that's what you got to do. But merely expressing an opinion about Kirk should obviously not be a firing offense, particularly since the view was posted to social media. It was not uttered in the classroom itself. Maybe. Maybe. Karen Attiah, good riddance. Then there's the case of Karen Attiah, a Washington Post columnist and global opinions editor who was fired by the paper for comments she made about Kirk on Blue Sky. This strikes me as a case where the cancellation was justified. To be clear, Attiah should not have lost her job for merely disagreeing with or criticizing Kirk. Yet she contends that this is exactly what happened. I am the one being silenced for doing my job, she writes on her new Substack. The Blue Sky posts in question were trollish and unflattering. America, especially white America, is not going to do what it needs to do to get rid of guns in this country, though Attiah is entitled to her opinion. What she is not entitled to do as a journalist and editor is manipulate someone else's quote. Attiah, by her own admission, wrote a post on Blue Sky in which she quoted Kirk saying the following: Black women do not have the brain processing power to be taken seriously. You have to go steal a white person's slot. That is a quote from Attiah, Karen Attiah, Washington Post columnist. Kirk never said this. Watch the clip. What he said was that the achievements of 4 specific black women, former First Lady Michelle Obama, former MSNBC host Joy Reid, Supreme Court Associate Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, and former Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, Democrat from Texas, were suspect because of affirmative action. The existence of racial preferences casts a pall over their selection for various positions. One can certainly criticize the point or disagree with how he worded it, Michelle Obama diversity hire, but he did not say the words attributed to him by Attiah. And she put it in quotes, which is journalistic malpractice. And she does not seem at all apologetic. She does not seem to be sorry that she did it. She doesn't seem to have any kind of guilt or shame that she did this. She is, in fact, saying that she was being silenced. She's the victim here. She is the victim for clearly violating the principles of her profession, spreading misinformation, disinformation, lying about people, and essentially, because she's saying this directly after his assassination, she is, in essence, justifying why he was killed. By again, making stuff up as a journalist who has been employed for who knows how many years as a Washington Post columnist and global opinions editor. If this person has no guilt or shame, does not think she did anything wrong by straight up making stuff up and lying about it, how many more articles and opinions has she put out that are also blatantly false? I would imagine this is not the first time. Okay? This doesn't seem like it would be the first time someone did this. That's a fundamentally different situation. Opposing cancel culture does not mean there should be zero accountability for anyone in a public role. It only means that those of us who denounce the excesses of woke enforcement during the late 2010s should similarly reject a right-wing counter-reaction that seeks to unperson anyone who does not hold Kirk in sufficient esteem. Again, I will say I don't see this as the case. I don't see people being canceled for saying Charlie Kirk was not an angel. I don't see that happening. Maybe it is, but I'm not seeing it. It's also worth keeping in mind that Kirk disdained cancel culture and loved debate. Seriously, he relished the fray more than most and enjoyed mixing it up with people who obviously disliked him. Launching a vast and unscrupulous campaign to silence everyone who shares an unkind thought about Kirk is a poor way to honor his legacy. If his legacy is promoting debate, that legacy is unfortunately now eclipsed by the fact that he was killed for promoting debate. It is perhaps unkind and unworthy of the man that his legacy is now caught up in the fact that he was killed for his work, but unfortunately that is the case. His legacy will now always be, at the very least, appended by the fact that all of his work was what got him killed. And unfortunately, that will probably be his most lasting legacy, is that showing America and perhaps the world in general that one side will celebrate your death if they disagree with your opinions and the fact that you are willing to debate those opinions in public. That's all for today. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Good luck in all your endeavors. Tell me how I was wrong down in the comments. I'll say farewell for now. Oy vey's. All right, so that was that. That was this one. And this is the second thing we're going to be doing today. Got a video here from Metatron that is on Destiny. Now, I'll be very clear and very honest here. Ever since the whole Trump assassination, dear God, I'm saying that word too many times today. I've kind of just completely cut Destiny out of any of my social media stuff. If there's a video with his face in it, gone, get rid of it. Don't show me this video anymore. Don't show me this channel anymore. I'm not interested in this. Get rid of it. And I have happily been able to completely excise him from my algorithm. I never get any Destiny stuff anymore. I'm very happy that that is the case. So all of this stuff, I'm assuming from Destiny about Charlie Kirk, I haven't seen any of it. I am expecting it to be disgusting and abhorrent. And, you know, like I said, I've cut him out. If this is going to give me more reason to do it, fantastic. I like Metatron. I will say, in fact, actually, I'm going to put that in part of the video here. We've got a video from Metatron here about Destiny. In response to the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Now, I would like to preface this video by saying that Metatron, in general, as far as I can tell, does not give political opinions. His interest does not seem to really be in politics. He seems to be mostly interested in history, in logic, and reason, and these types of things. And that is usually the perspective from which I see most of his responses. And the fact that he's got this video about Destiny and he's got a previous video about Hassan about political takes kind of shows just how far the impact of Kirk's assassination has spread. It's spread to what I would say normies. And I would consider Metatron, forgive me for this, but I would say he is essentially a normie. He is not a terminally online person who's made politics their religion or their overriding hobby. He is someone who has his own interests and hobbies, and those are the things that he cares about. And as much as they are influenced by politics, he's willing to talk about them. But otherwise, if people keep out of it, he doesn't care. He doesn't matter. The fact that now he is making these videos about politics and politics commentators kind of means that, unfortunately, his assassination, Kirk's assassination, has recruited a bunch of people. And I say unfortunately because I would love to live in a world where in which most people could just divorce themselves from politics and say, it doesn't matter. I don't care. I would prefer to live in that world. Unfortunately, we don't.
Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. You know how a few days ago I made a video dedicated to talking about Hassan Piker? Well, today we've got another one, as you know, and this video is dedicated to Destiny. Now, whatever you may think about Destiny's ability to speak, debate, positions, rhetoric, political analysis is all completely irrelevant. Because
I agree. I kind of actually agree. I liked him for his ability to debate. That was what I was interested in. That's what kind of recruited me to watching his videos. I can't say that I ever agreed with most of his opinions, but I liked the way in which he presented them. I liked the way he was kind of, the pure logic person. It impressed me. It really did. And unfortunately, that has now, well, maybe not unfortunately, perhaps fortunately, he has shown that that is not the case. That's not the person that he is. Those are not the principles that he lives by. He is as ideologically driven as anyone else is. He just decided to present his opinions in that usually hyper logical fashion to, appeal to people.
Because as it was the case with Hassan Piker, he too has crossed multiple lines. I used to watch his debates sometimes. I watched him debate Andrew Wilson, I watched him debate Ben Shapiro, and in general I enjoyed listening to positions from both sides in order for me to maintain an open mind and seeing how people counter arguments that otherwise you would only hear within echo chambers. However, I completely stopped watching him after he made fun of the firefighter who lost his life
Agreed. Ditto. Did the same.
during President Trump's assassination attempt. At that point, I thought that Stephen Bonnell had reached his new low, his lowest point, but boy was I wrong. It seems like that similarly to Piker Boy, Destiny has also been calling for political violence for a while and appears to have had no repercussions when it comes to possible deplatforming or even legal procedures when it comes to that so far. Watch.
I'm ready for the great cleansing, dude.
Cleansing?
The cleansing.
What cleansing?
When we genocide conservatives in this country.
Are you gonna be out in the streets with your Glock?
Maybe. I gotta go back to Nebraska and grab it.
You genuinely do hate conservatives, don't you?
Yikes. I mean, that's... Again, I would like to live in a world where someone could say something just as spicy as that, and everyone would say, well, it's somebody blowing off steam, whatever. Obviously, freedom of speech has almost never really included stuff like, calls for violence and incitement to violence. But again, we don't live in a world where in which if someone on the other side had said similar things, they would have faced no repercussions.
Very much so. I've moved full on to the political violence level or the real violence level when it comes to conservative people. Yeah, I think they need to be excised from my fucking country. I think they are demonstrably fucking evil people by any moral system that most people would use.
Yeah, you instead are a saint.
And then I just hate them because they tend to destroy the outcomes related to this country, which is what I'm concerned with. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a topic I'm not yet sort of ready to touch.
Conservatives have been disgusting for years, which is why I don't give a fuck about anybody that winds up at any of these rallies and gets shot or whatever the fuck, okay? Because they had no problem making fun of Paul Pelosi. The entire world would be better off if these people were permanently removed from these platforms. There is no downside and only upside to see people like Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Tim Pool never be allowed to publicly broadcast their opinions ever again. It's exclusively bad stuff that happens. Conservatives have been
I mean, and again, this is kind of my point that I made in other videos, which is we don't live in a free speech society because that has happened to other conservative figures. If you're going to be sad now that it is being applied to everyone now has the tool of cancel culture. Everyone now has access to this self-defense armament of, speech. You are just being not only a hypocrite, but it's I don't even care if you're being a hypocrite. It's just, no, it's not going to happen anymore. You're just, this is the world you made. You're living in it now. You wanted this. I hope you enjoy being, on the other side of the equation.
I think you have been disgusting for years. The logical idiocy of trying to tell us that laughing and making fun of Pelosi's husband's situation is horrific and ending up doing the same thing. Hypocrite. Of course, making fun of what happened to Pelosi is wrong, was wrong, should be condemned, but you did the same thing, so you are no better than the people you say you hate. You should hate yourself now. There are plenty of people in this world who have never made fun or laughed at someone else's misfortunes. You are not one of them. So what happens? This is of course just the tip of the iceberg. Let's have a look at what kind of posts he has produced after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, shall we?
I'd really rather we didn't, because there's no way it's good.
For instance, there is this clip. During a Piers Morgan Uncensored, the following statement was made. Stop calling everyone you disagree with Nazis. There is a real world out there, and your words can make people pick up guns.
And this is perhaps the other important point here, which is by using these labels, which are very much inciting, the point's been made before by other people, not just me, which is if someone actually was a Nazi, someone actually was a fascist, someone actually was enacting policies or trying to push certain things that are so horrible and evil, it would be almost your duty to stop that person by potentially any means possible. Certainly, as long as they're not in a position of power or whatever, you could debate them, you'd be fighting against them, you'd be doing everything you could. But as I've said with Charlie Kirk, he's winning the debate. He's won the debate. So the people on the left have felt that. They felt that, they're losing their cultural stranglehold. And therefore, the only way to fight against these fascist, Nazi, evil people is no longer debate, no longer public policy, no longer politics. Now it is only violence. That is the only recourse left to them because we have to fight these horrible, evil people. And I think a lot of people are now, unfortunately, wising up to the fact that they're calling people Nazis, not to shut down the conversation, but to potentially get them killed.
I agree, 100%. What does Mr. Bonnell say in response to that? You know what actually legitimizes widespread violence? ? The President of the United States constantly reminding people that the 2020 elections was fraudulent. Close quotes. The words spoken, the claims made by the President of the United States do not legitimize any form of widespread violence.
Clearly
and this
not.
type of mentality that causes outcomes such as what happened to Charlie Kirk. And mind you, this post was made 23 hours ago, which means after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. No. Whatever statement made by the President...
And that also does kind of, he is essentially, if we're going to be logical about this, he's saying, hey, this is justifying widespread violence. The president is reminding people that the 2020 election was fraudulent. That is kind of destiny then giving tacit approval to more violence against Trump. Because he's saying this, he's saying, yeah, it's justifying it. He's justifying violence against it. That's a bit of a leap, but not really. There is a logical through line there.
Of the United States legitimizes you to use your words to disagree or make debunking videos if that's what you want to do. That's what it legitimizes you to do. I guess you could...
Yeah, words legitimize words.
Strike, as long as you keep it peaceful, but that's it. What else did he post? Let's check this one on his page.
I hate Charlie Kirk. I think he's actually a Satan spawn, but he's very, very strategically minded. I hate Charlie Kirk. I think he's actually a Satan spawn, but he's very, very strategically minded. I hate Charlie Kirk. I think he's actually...
Right. Charlie Kirk is a Satan spawn, according to... And somehow CNN showed that. Absolutely, CNN showed this tolerance. I am sure that the left is gonna be packed of new people moving from the center, thinking, man, you know what? This is what I really want. You convinced me now that you... Yeah. This is exactly the 12th of September. 12th of September. And what he has to say about it? Make a joke and change it into was. That's why you...
Okay. Hang on. What did he say here? All right. Yeah, he literally still holds this opinion, and he does make it into a joke. He changes the tense. Yeah, the kind of celebratory aspect of this is the things that you've seen from Destiny. And again, you saw it with the Trump assassination attempt where the guy was killed. His response to it probably a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but probably also he really felt this way, which was there's one less voter in Pennsylvania who's going to vote for Trump. That was something that he probably, I think, actually really felt. He, was a little tongue-in-cheek about it. He thought it was a joke as well. He thought it was funny. He thought it was edgy. But he probably actually really thought that. He probably actually thought, yeah, you know what? This is actually a good thing. One less person voting for my political opponent. I don't think he cares about people. And there is something to be said for not giving people like that any credence, any benefit of the doubt that the reason they hold these political opinions is because they want human flourishing to the greatest degree. They seem to just want political victories or power, their side to win, to dominate others. And if it means that people die, that, humanity does not benefit as a whole, they're okay with it. Because these thoughts and actions and words do not seem to suggest that this person is a pragmatic but benevolent actor. They seem to be a selfish actor who is only interested in their side's victory, as opposed to, I think my view helps the most people, and I care about people more than I do anything else. If you were to convince me or you were to show me that your approach is better for more people, I am agnostic as to the ways in which it will work, as long as it works. He's kind of demonstrating that that's not the case.
Make a joke and change it into was. That's why these people are the enemy of the left before being the enemy of the right. They are the reason so many centrists are turning right-wing, and they are the reason why so many moderate lefties are turning centrist.
Yeah.
Prove me wrong.
No, it's completely true. It's completely accurate that this is, again, even if you were just to say purely tactically, if that's the only thing you care about, which I don't know if you can at this point. I think as a human being, you have to kind of, when you're confronted with, this video of, this man being murdered in front of his wife and children and the circumstances around it, if you don't feel something, you have essentially excised your soul. You have somehow become bereft of a fundamental human quality, which is the ability to feel compassion for other people. And the fact that Destiny has not, as far as I can tell, demonstrated any of that does mean that I don't know if I will ever care about any of his opinions ever again, even if they are well-reasoned, because they are coming from a place that is inhumane. And I think a lot of people are now going to disregard his opinion on leftist politics. They're losing people. Because if it comes from the mouth of Destiny, even if you would agree with the, argument, you'd go, yeah, I agree with the argument, but it's coming from Destiny. He's abhorrent. I disagree. In the same way that, 20 years ago, if a KKK member in a full garb were to spout a completely rational, reasonable opinion on anything, you'd go, okay, I disagree with that. If they were to say the sky is blue, you'd go, no, it's green. Screw that. I don't want to agree with a KKK member. This is essentially what Destiny and like Hassan and these people are doing now. All the people that are celebrating on TikTok his Charlie Kirk's death, gleefully smiling that he's dead, you are the new KKK. Everyone who views that is going to go, I want nothing to do with you. Whatever your opinion is, I've got the opposite. So you're not doing yourself or your side any favors.
Of course, he made more videos about it. Let's have a look. Is he being at least basically decent? I'm not asking for him to like Charlie Kirk.
Of course not.
That would be a lie, clearly. So I appreciate honesty. But what is he saying? Is he being decent? Decent and destiny are two D's you will never see together anywhere. He says, don't apologize for Charlie Kirk's death. You gotta be joking. His body was still warm and his wife is still grieving, and this is what he does. And by the way, he was mocking his wife as well, as she was like kneeling in front of the casket crying, and he was mocking her. This guy is vile. This guy is anything and everything he accuses the opposite side to be. So whenever this guy sees someone vile on the other side, which of course exists, vile people exist everywhere. There are vile people in my religion, Christianity. That doesn't make Christianity wrong. It just makes the people who are within Christianity that happen to be vile, vile. And this is what people like him are doing. They take the full group and they apply the worst rhetoric from a single bad apple onto the entire group, and then they say their call to actions for violence. This is the difference. This is an important aspect that needs to be underlined. Do not take bad apples and apply them to everyone. Take the bad apples and hold them accountable. But he says,
I entirely agree, especially because if you do widen it out and apply it to everyone, you're going to hit a bunch of innocent people, which is bad for those innocent people who I have sympathy for. And it, of course, also, again, if we're thinking tactically, it looks bad for the side that, did it. If you are accusing an innocent person, if you destroy their lives, it looks really bad for the people that did that. Not only is that innocent person's life ruined, but now your side looks like mean, callous monsters for doing this. So don't do it. I know people are angry now. It's good. It's understandable, but you need to be, better. You need to be looking forward, and you need to be holding yourselves to these principles, which I know you hold. Or at the very least, I hope you do.
Don't apologize for Charlie Kirk's death. Excuse me, what? First of all, who is asking to apologize? Look at the mental manipulation there. No one is asking someone who didn't do anything to apologize. However, if there is someone like you who has been constantly pushing for violence onto people you disagree with, yes, you should apologize, but you won't because you wanted this. He said it, he stated it. He said this is what he wanted. This is the America he wants to live in, an America where people cannot freely express their ideas without the fear of being gunned down like animals. This is the America he wants, which is why he's now doubling down and saying, don't apologize. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, you're not. You're right.
Tell me my analysis is incorrect.
This sounds like a bad thing to say. This sounds like a bad thing to say, and people don't like to think of it this way, but
it is a bad thing to say.
The reality is there are like 4 different worlds that we can live in, and it relates to like this concept of like a prisoner's dilemma. In the prisoner's dilemma, I think a lot of people talk about this. I don't know how many people are aware of how that actually works, but for a prisoner's dilemma, the issue with it is a...
Who speaks faster, XQC or Destiny? Enunciation. If you want, I can give you some diction lessons, Destiny. Since I am, after all, a professional language teacher, you need to learn to enunciate.
Paradoxical setup, kind of, where there is...
I think XQC probably speaks faster, but way less intelligibly. Destiny, I can usually understand what he's saying. That might just be the accent on XQC's part, though.
A positive outcome for 2 different players. However, both players basically become incentivized using logic to take the worst outcome, basically, for collectively. So you have 2 different people who are caught, and the 2 people who are caught are being interrogated by the police. And then the question is do you cooperate with the police and rat out your friend, or do you not cooperate with the police? I shouldn't be using cooperate lyrics. Or do you not work with the police and then you cooperate with your friend? That's supposed to be phrased, right? Okay, we'll say Prisoner one cooperates.
Okay, I don't care about this.
Yeah,
also
no.
because and then people tell me I use word salads.
There is a worse world than this one here. We're just pretending that it is. The violence against each other. Civility.
Yeah.
Okay. This is where we kind of want to be.
Yes.
All right. We want to be.
Well, you don't. We do.
Yeah,
You want violence on the streets.
you do. Yeah.
So no.
You want civility as long as your side is the one in charge of all of civil society. Otherwise, all comers.
You don't want civility. Don't put we.
Yeah.
You and I are not the same.
Here where things are civil. All right. Meaning we're not killing each other
Right.
or having a bad time enacting violence against each other. This would be like ideal. This is a good
Yeah.
world. Okay.
Yeah.
Right now, at best, we're in this world. Okay.
Which you created.
Nobody wants to say this, but the problem is that
Yes.
this here is not the worst world. We're just pretending that it is. Okay.
Of course. So
The
who's,
reason why it doesn't make sense for Democrats to disavow over and over and over again when Republicans won't do it is because there is a worse world for this. And the worst world is
I would like to underline, not to interrupting too much, but I would like to underline. Did you see what he's doing? Democrats are disavowing, so the whole group are saying violence bad, but Republicans are not doing that. Did you not see the wave of Democrats and liberals that had been specifically laughing and giggling?
Yeah. And that is, generally speaking, what people are on the right. That is what they are decrying. Because the assumption is, by the outpouring of emotion, the violence is bad. The violence is already disavowed simply because of the fact that you've got tears on your face when you're confronted with it. You go, yeah, it's bad. I think it's bad. Of course I think it's bad. Do you not see the emotional response that I have to it? I don't need to explicitly disavow, and I'm sure plenty of people have and said, yeah, this is bad. Obviously it's bad. Not only is it bad because I don't agree with political violence, but, my friend was killed. Yeah, I didn't know Charlie Kirk, but a lot of the people who are, making comments about this stuff did. So of course it's bad.
For Charlie Kirk's death, and I found some TikTokers who specifically asked as a call to action, now go and do Charlie's children.
Or Asmund
wife.
Gold, his wife.
Is he
Yep.
is he out of his mind? The reality is, because I'm the one who tells that this is a political manipulator, I tell it how it is. The reality is that there are some people that condemn violence, usually the overwhelming majority, and then there are people who want violence. However, what happened in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination and the aftermath, you are probably a liberal and you're watching this and you're saying, no, I don't want that. I don't want violence. I'm against violence. I didn't like Charlie Kirk, but I'm against violence. Great. I never said all liberals. He's the one who speaks in full groups. I don't. I'm saying there is a certain number of people that are specifically celebrating, laughing, giggling, and that is causing a strong reaction on the right.
That is true. That is what I would say, and I think most people would probably agree with this. The violence, Charlie Kirk's assassination itself certainly would have an outpouring of emotions. Absolutely. And there would be some result from it. But the things that I see people being really upset with is not his death, especially if they didn't know him, but the gleeful response. The fact that people were very happy about it, they were justifying it, they were going, he deserved it. He had it coming. Not only did he have it coming, I'm glad he got it. And I hope it happens to more people. It was the same thing with Trump, where they were like, oh man, it's like, I'm upset with this. I'm not upset that he, faced political violence. I'm upset that he didn't get killed. I'm upset that he missed. That was certainly, Destiny's response. Absolutely it was. Not, oh God, we can't do political violence. It was like, no, go to the range more often, get more accurate. Aim for center mass. You don't want to be going for a headshot. That was his response.
Now, are there some people on the right that are pushing it too far? Yes. If someone on the right says, now we need to retaliate off Destiny, it's wrong. And
Absolutely it is, and don't do it. I want nothing to do with it. You are wrong. Reflect, pray on it, whatever it takes. That is wrong. It is not the right move to make. Don't do it.
I will call it out. That's not the way to do it. But let's not pretend that the same level of laughing and giggling happened when the Democratic senators were offed. I didn't see
It didn't.
these thousands and thousands of conservatives, particularly kids, going around saying, we got this person in the neck, we got this person in the neck. I didn't see that. I didn't see that. And if there were some, which is why it is absolutely abhorrent that now is going to pretend as if all liberals want no violence, but all Republicans never say that. You're out of your mind.
Yeah.
You're out of your mind. This is why centrists turn right.
I'll call
True.
it genocide, but I mean, you can put whatever you want here. Genocide, absolute violence, one-sided firing squad, whatever, execution.
Right.
There
That's,
is a worse
wrong.
world than this one here,
we all know that.
and that worse
course.
world is one side enacting violence.
Of course.
And the problem is that the Republican rhetoric is pushing us in that direction. Where the Republicans want to push us here, right? Where it's a Dem utter loss. And they do that by already trying to say that we are here, right? You've heard the Republicans say over and over again, it's all left-wing violence, it's all left-wing violence, it's all left-wing violence. And they do that as a call to their own side that they need to respond with violence.
And the way to prove them wrong, if that's what you want to do, is to condemn the shooting of the children, the Christian children, by the way,
Yeah.
that were killed by someone who clearly wasn't a Republican. I think it's obvious. And then also
Yes.
this Charlie Kirk's assassination. You do not have the moral ground if you laugh. It's one of the two. You got to choose. I would have respected Democrats if they had said, and I do respect those Democrats like that have been condemning this, but a lot of you guys are laughing about it, so you lose the moral ground. Be angry at those people on your side that are laughing about this. You included. You laughed. You said you were gonna make fun of the firefighter. You were the one who pushed the people in your audience to now go around and laugh. So you lost the moral ground. You want to regain it? Condemn the violence, but don't make a video saying don't apologize for Charlie Kirk's death.
So the
Yeah. And I mean, maybe we'll get to it in this video, but the response that I saw from Destiny on this was essentially, you shouldn't do it because it makes you look weak. Makes you look weak. It is politically inconvenient to say you're sorry about it, to say that it's bad. Gavin Newsom, who I'm not sure in this video, but you know, Destiny says he's weak for saying he disavows the violence. If you're not disavowing the violence, you're kind of tacitly supporting it. You know, if you're not calling it out as a bad thing, and you're saying I disagree with Charlie and these types of things, you are to a degree co-signing it. You're kind of, you know, not explicitly, but this is a clearly horrible, evil act. You should be disavowing it. You should be.
reason why I'm not sympathetic to people saying we need to turn down the temperature. Well,
Look.
just because the other side isn't doing it doesn't mean we can't. No, you. We're not in the worst world right now. This world, right, which is this part of the prisoner's dilemma box, this world is preferable right here to this world.
You see what he's doing? Once again, mental manipulation. It's as clear as day. He's giving you an answer that is correct. Yes, the world with violence is preferable to the world with genocide. That's correct, but it's unrelated. That's what he does. So he says something, and you listen to it, and you're like, well, yeah, I agree with that. But it has nothing to do with, oh, that's why we shouldn't call for stopping violence or lowering temperature. Do you see how unrelated the two things are? And he's doing it on purpose. He's saying what he wants to say, which is the message, don't tone down the violence, is what he's saying. And then, because people who are decent, left or right or center, are going to be like, well, no, we should tone down the violence. What are you on about? And then he's going to say, but no, because it's preferable to have this world over this one, isn't it? And then people are going to be like, yeah, I mean, sure, it is preferable. No, civility is preferable, you liar.
Yeah.
Or this world.
Yeah, and you're not moving towards civility. You're moving towards either violence or, you know, this genocide, absolute violence, whatever. You're moving towards one of those two. you're not moving towards civility. You're not potentially, advancing a position that moves you more towards civility, which would be everyone disavowing violence. Even if they don't believe it, the fact that you're saying it is moving the culture in general, society, towards civility and away from violence.
Right? And the one-sided calls for just us, we just need to disavow. No, I'm sorry. The President of the United States, without having any idea at all who the actual shooter is, has already blamed one side.
Because there was a bullet which said, "Catch this fascist." Which is the side that calls the other fascist?
Yeah, I don't think there was any real reason to say. There was no possible information, there was no possible inkling that was reasonable that anybody could have had that this person was a leftist or not. We needed more information. I understand that. I understand we want to be completely 100% sure before we make any of these accusations, but also there was some information that did give pretty decent inklings on which side that they were.
Fascist. As someone who receives that insult constantly, be real, Destiny. Be honest.
For real. I second.
Once again, I'm honest on my end. I'm not saying all Democrats do this. I'm not saying all liberals are like this. I've seen a lot in my comments that say I'm left-wing, but it's horrible. I didn't like what Charlie Kirk said, but this is unbelievable, and I strongly... You're great. That's a good lefty.
Yeah.
Differently from you. You instead demonize the entirety of the other side and then add calls to violence. This is the difference between me and him. If you appreciate my content so far and wish to help ensure my ability to continue to tell it how it is, regardless of any possible backlash, please support this channel on Patreon. Any support?
I would second that. I mean, I think he's a good guy. Yeah, definitely go ahead. If you've got the money, if you've got the ability, if you like his stuff, go check him out. Metatron. I will attempt to put the link in the bio if I remember. If I don't, please let me know in the comments, because I'm sometimes an idiot about that stuff and I'll forget about it. But again, as I said, I think Metatron is, essentially apolitical. I'm sure he does have a political opinion, but any of the videos that I've seen have not been about politics. They have been about, truth. They've been about reason. They've been about, historicity, the truth of, the matter of, the Roman Republic or something like that. That's what he's concerned with. That's what he's interested in. And as much as politics tries to change it or obfuscate the truth or manipulate it for political reasons as opposed to truthful ones, historical ones, reasons of accuracy, he objects to it. And apparently that makes him right-wing. And again, this is pushing the, I don't want to say temperature up, but this is pushing the window of acceptable targets for horrific reprisals away from, people that are actively engaged in real violence, and therefore defending yourself against that is understandable to everybody. Everybody who is using right-wing speech is enacting violence on other people because that speech is hurting certain marginalized groups. And then we would say, all right, anyone who's right-wing is fascist. And then we're going to say anybody who disagrees with us politically is right-wing. And if anybody who disagrees with us is right-wing, that means they're fascist, that means they're enacting violence, that means that they are justifiably targets for physical violence. That is not good. I do not agree with it. I think it is. I shouldn't say I think it is wrong, and foolish, and stupid, and dangerous. And everybody, right or left, should be able to understand that and should disavow it. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Good luck in all your endeavors. I'll say farewell for now. Alrighty. So that was Metatron. That was some good stuff. I think I've got one more video around Destiny here that I will watch. I'm not making a video about it. But then we'll basically just get into possibly this Gary's Economics fact check thing, or we'll be getting into this podcast from Trigonometry, which is Tom Holland. I've had this in my queue for a while, so I might actually go for this. Because I might want to make a video about this Gary's Economics stuff. And I haven't looked at it specifically, so it might be worth doing a video on. I'm not sure.
Hash out the crime statistics? Not exactly like...
You need conservatives to be afraid of getting killed when they go to events so that they look to their leadership to turn down the temperature. The issue is right now, they don't feel like there's any fear. Like, I don't know, it's like memes. It's just memes to everybody, I guess. I don't know, bro. I don't know. I don't care. I'm playing video games.
I think that Destiny wants to get banned. There's no other explanation than the fact that for the last couple of months, this is what he has done. I don't have like all of his tweets, but he decided to make fun of dead children in Texas.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem that way. The other side of that the only other side that I could potentially engage with would be he's just that protected. He just feels that he is that above consequences that, he can say horrible stuff and nothing will happen to him because free speech, because he's living in a world of, like pre-2016 internet politics, because he hasn't, and I mean, I guess he has to a degree, but, he hasn't suffered ramifications of, having unpopular opinions online. He has suffered a little bit, but obviously, not as much as other people who have been, for real canceled. So, yeah, either he wants to get banned or he is just that above reproach. He thinks what he's saying will never have any consequences.
Basically blaming it on the Texas porn ban. He decided to get involved in this tragedy. He made fun of a firefighter. And so what I think he's trying to do is to show that unlike the right, he has principles. Like he wants to show that the right doesn't have principles. Because a couple of years ago, the conversation was that right-wingers are being oppressed by the left, and you get banned for posting memes, you get banned for posting jokes, and Destiny was like, no, you're getting banned because you're bad people. And now basically what Destiny's trying to do is like, oh, look, I'm making jokes. I can make jokes as well, and the right-wingers want to ban me. And so I legitimately think that he does want to get banned. Like he wants to reach to the point where he gets banned, and he goes like, aha, see...
I think that's entirely possible, because I don't know if he would actually get banned from the platforms that he would make money from. Like is Twitch going to ban him? If they're going to ban him, I would imagine they would ban, Hassan. That's probably. I mean, I don't want to say that's not going to happen. Fingers crossed, but. Doesn't seem like it. And I'm sure he's got alternative income streams. So him being banned or canceled is not actually going to impact him. It's not going to hurt him in the way that it would hurt, a normal person or other people. So, could he be thinking that far ahead and thinking to himself, hey, this would be cool. I can just keep saying, horrible, egregious shit. And eventually they'll ban me and I'll be able to raise up the flag of free speech that I've not really held in esteem for the past, 10 years.
Right-wingers BTFO. I mean, the problem with this is that you can't like freeze a moment in time. You know, like if you have people that have principles from their parents and like they genuinely believe in free speech and they genuinely believe in conversation, and then they witness with their own eyes the guy that also believes in free speech and debate getting shot on camera in front of his daughter, and then thousands of leftists cheering that on Reddit, on Blue Sky. Yeah, it's not that they're hypocritical. It's not that they never believed in free speech. It's that that type of experience can change people. You know?
Yeah.
And so it's not like, well, the right wing is hypocritical. It's like, no, like the left managed to persuade the right wing to change their mind on a couple of issues.
Yeah. You won. You won. I mean, you should be celebrating. You should be happy that we've come around to your side. You've made a very compelling argument that your side is correct on this issue. You have pushed society to this point. Society now exists without freedom of speech, and they were like, "Oh, okay. Well, this was apparently the catalyst that woke people up, that made them realize, oh, okay, yeah, you're right. We don't live in a society that values free speech. We don't have free speech anymore, obviously, because the guy who was, preaching for free speech, who was exercising free speech, was straight up murdered, and then his murder was celebrated." And you'd go, oh, well, why did that happen? Well, it could only happen if we lived in a society that doesn't value free speech and therefore doesn't have free speech, and therefore we should, change how we act. We should act like we're living in the world we're living in, as opposed to a fantasy world. And now that's what you got.
And what Destiny is doing is like he's trying to be antagonistic. He's trying to be like a cheeky little shit. And eventually, I think, he may actually get canceled. He may get his wish, because right now, right-wingers are livid. And they're not livid because of matters of principles or anything. It's because they're looking at the opinions that Charlie Kirk used to have. And they can say, well, that my grandfather had those opinions.
And I've said this before. Charlie Kirk would be, 20 years ago, would be like a black Democrat. He would be a Democrat for most of his political opinions, and the Christian thing, the black community is, more out and out Christian and these types of things. So yeah, he would have been a black Democrat 20 years ago.
Or my dad has these opinions, or I have these opinions. And the left excited to be shot, right? And then they look at Destiny, which is basically saying, no, what you need to do, right? Like, is we need more of what happened to Charlie Kirk. Like, that needs to be normalized. You need to live in that society. And so, in order to escape from that, you need to ask your leaders to dial down the rhetoric while the left is actually shooting people. I mean, even from a logical standpoint, that's fucking insane. Like, that's not how human beings work.
Right.
Like let's assume you...
Yeah, I mean, people do not work that way. And this is the thing, people don't operate on principles all the time. They don't act on reason and rationality. They're making implicit, intuitive leaps. And it's because those implicit, intuitive leaps keep human beings alive more effectively, more efficiently than reason and principles and these types of things. It's not to say that those, principles are bad, or they're not long-term better. But in terms of, short-term decision-making, if, one side is very clearly going to present an enormous risk of death, and the other one is, long-term, bad stuff, but not death, you're going to go to the one that's, we're avoiding the thing that, is giving us a massive immediate risk of horrible consequences / death. We're going to get rid of that. We're going to go away
would
from
have
that.
Such a society where like the left would shoot people regularly to terrorize, to traumatize the right. Well, the reaction would be from the right to demand that their leaders do more. Like, it would radicalize them. It would actually demand that the leaders crack down on all the terrorist cells, start arresting people, completely destroy even the very concept of free speech and liberty, and just install like an authoritarian state to keep them safe. That's what would happen if Destiny were to get his wish.
It would.
And for those of you who watch my channel, you remember that I said Short Fat Otaku is cooking? Like when I saw when I saw the Charlie Kirk assassination, I was wondering, like, well, what would Short Fat Otaku say? Because I usually know he agrees with Destiny. So I was saying, like, look, he's cooking. He's going to have a take. I don't think the dish is ready yet, but I did see a tweet from him. What he actually said was conservatives need to be afraid to go on events, so they will look to their leadership to turn down the temperature. Whether you agree with this sentiment or not, you misrepresented it in your tweet and posted the actual video debunking yourself. I don't see how this changes. I don't see how this changes anything, right? Like, if you take the statement, conservatives need to be afraid to go out on events, period, right? That's neither bad nor worse compared to the full statement. It's like, so they will look up to their leadership to turn down the temperature. The very fact that they need to be afraid to go on events is the issue. Like, I don't care the reasoning. That is absolutely
the other side of this, conservatives need to be afraid to go to events. Okay, that's one thing. That's your presupposition. This is the thing that you want to happen. They need to be afraid to go to events. And then hopefully they'll look to their leaderships to turn down the temperature. Because apparently, if the leadership turns down the temperature, conservatives will not need to be afraid to go to events anymore. This is a possibility. This is a supposition based on the thing. This is the thing you're calling for. Conservatives need to be afraid to go to events. Why? Or how? How would you make them more afraid? If there's, bombs, if there's more killings, if there's more, horrible terrorist attacks against conservatives at events, that would make conservatives more afraid to go to events. And then hopefully those conservatives will be so afraid to go to events, they'll say, oh God, all right, well, they'll look to their leaderships to turn down the temperature. And then if the leadership turns down the temperature, and turning down the temperature means, self-censoring more, don't say anything that's going to upset these lunatics that are enacting terrorist actions against you for your political opinions, then they will no longer need to go out to those events because the terrorist cells that are enacting violence on conservatives are very reasonable, and they'll just go, oh, okay, well, they stopped disagreeing with us. Our opinions are totally static. It's not like there's, like an ever-evolving purity test amongst leftists. That for sure, that's not a thing. Therefore, we don't need to continue our reign of violent terror against conservatives. Yeah. That makes sense.
Possible reason why in a free society any political group should be afraid to go out to events unless the event itself is illegal, like they're planning an attack on something, and then they should be afraid of the law. That they shouldn't be afraid of some vigilante or some terrorist, right? Like, it's insane. That there is absolutely no excuse for what Destiny is saying. And again, even from a practical point of view, right? Like, even from a pragmatic one, completely devoid of morality or anything like that, if you make a group of people afraid, you're radicalizing them. You're not going to get them to look to their leaders while they're getting shot, and it's like, oh, leaders, can you tone down the temperature so that maybe, we get some mercy from the shooters? Like, that's insane, And not to mention, the reason right-wingers like Charlie Kirk exist is because the left wasn't leaving them alone. Right? It was impossible for someone to keep to themselves and maintain their same lifestyle when wokeness was bombarding every single avenue of entertainment, was bombarding every single business, was bombarding every single school, every single university, where people were indeed worried. It's like, okay, so if I have some kids that I send them to school, are they going to learn their ABCs or their LGBTs? And apparently, if you talk about that, if you even try to complain, you get shot.
Yeah, and I mean that is kind of that is kind of the part of this. It's like, okay, hey, conservatives. This is from the article we read earlier, which is like, hey, some teachers are saying stuff that they don't like Kirk, and they said he's a gross, racist, awful person who fueled the fires of division. This is a teacher. Okay, well that person's getting canceled. Okay, well if this person has these opinions and you as a parent disagree with them, if you were to mention that to your school board and say, this person doesn't, doesn't agree with the way I would like to raise my children. I don't really want them teaching these things to my kids, especially because this is not a thing that is at all involved with, like history or math or biology or whatever. You would be canceled. Yeah.
And then people cheer. And then you have Destiny saying we need more of that. Right? So then it's like, well, where are the free speech warriors? Well, I keep saying I'm still a free speech guy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like seeing people getting censored. But I'm starting to understand that if the left is saying that words are like violence, then fine, you don't do violence except in self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with free speech, right? Like, normally, I don't like seeing censorship or bans. But if another person asks for banning, for censorship, or even worse, killing someone over opening their mouth,
crazy.
I think it's perfectly acceptable to censor them. Like, I don't think you can have free speech while censors are being around. So, like, if we have to decide, like, a way of quantifying...
And I mean, this is the point that I've been making for a little bit now, which is free speech is universal. It's an inherently universal value. It's a system that only operates in the universal. Either everybody has it or nobody has it. You cannot have a society that values free speech or tries to have free speech if it's only applied to a certain group. Then you don't have freedom of speech. Freedom of speech means everybody gets to say anything they want. That's the point of it. That's its very nature. If you don't have that and you don't defend it when, the absolute worst people on the planet say the most abhorrent shit possible, you're degrading the value. And then as it goes down, as it goes away, as you chip away at it, it's immediately destroyed. It's destroyed very quickly, as we've seen. As we've seen. It used to be that people would, I want to say it's the ADL, would defend legit neo-Nazis for saying neo-Nazi stuff because they valued free speech. Because they knew that if this horrible, repugnant person is not able to say this awful, atrocious thing very soon, very quickly, a whole group of people are not going to be able to say the most benign stuff because somebody else disagrees with it. And, that's the world we live in now.
Free speech. Well, a society with censor has less free speech than a society without. So I guess it's for the greater good, right? To censor a couple of people so that the rest of us can talk freely. And if Destiny goes around and says, yeah, well, right-wingers should be afraid to go to events, like what happens at events? People talk, right? So, like, he wants to censor. So, yeah, no, I don't think it's hypocritical to ask for people that want to crack down on the freedom of expression of others to be censored. I think it's self-defense. I think the moment someone starts asking for banning or censorship, I think they should be censored. I think that's the rule. Someone that doesn't ask for bans or censorship, whatever they may do or whatever they may be, I think they should be allowed to speak freely. I think they should be allowed to express themselves. But I also think there's a difference between a person getting...
I do like that. I will also say that I think that is a good You know, in the spot we are now, where in which there are a bunch of people that are, you know, being canceled for having these opinions, I think that is a good way to determine where restraint should be applied, where sort of, you know, charity and generosity should be given out, should be meted out to people, you know, who have said things that are bad. Certainly I think there's like a line to cross. There's things that are like so horribly egregious that, and even there I would generally say the line that I would draw, like, that are so horribly egregious, generally speaking, those are probably held under they are already under the purview of like other legal actions. Like, what they're saying is, you know, inciting violence or is justifying it, is pushing it, is, you know, is already covered under existing laws, and therefore we don't need to, you know, go any further. We can just, you know, apply things equally and fairly. But if they're saying something that's like, you know, not over that line, where it's like, you know, even if this person's never called for any kind of banning or any of this stuff before, they said something that's so out of pocket and crazy, they are, you know, like a legitimate target for this cancellation stuff. If you have somebody who's said stuff that's like really bad, but you're like, okay, I can agree, like, you know, I super don't agree with it, but it is really bad, but I can see, you know, like, I'm on the fence about it. If they've, in the past, they've been like, ban this person, censor this person, get rid of them, get them off the planet, you know, get them off all this, you know, social media, all this kind of stuff, then you'd go, okay, well, you know, you want this. This is what you voted for. You get it. And, you know, it's unfortunate that it applies to you. There you go. You got it. I think that's reasonable. I think it's a reasonable way to look at it.
Censored because he believes there's two genders, and a person getting censored because he advocates for the banning and the removal of free speech of other people. If leftists can't see the difference, I don't see how that's a right-wing problem. I think right-wingers can sleep just fine with their morality intact if they knew that they censored another censor, or that they censored the person that wanted to shoot someone over the fact that they were just talking.
Yeah.
I don't think that's hypocritical. I think they can sleep just fine.
I think so too.
Let me know.
I think so too. I think that's very reasonable. All right. So now we'll go to this big giant podcast. Let's see. Yeah, this should take us realistically to the end. And I've actually, again, I've had this in the chamber for a good long while. I wanted to get into this a while back. Historian Tom Holland, Islam, Christianity in the West. And if I do start to make more videos, I've still got like this, and then I've got the other Diary of a CEO debate with Daniel Priestley and Gary's Economics that I want to get into. If I'm going to do that, I need to kind of re-brainwash myself into the UK state of mind, which is a rough spot to be in right now. Yeah, proud to be an American. It would be rough to be in the UK right now. It would be bad.
Through a great...
So do we want to do this one, or do we want to do... What was the other one? Britain is headed for a financial meltdown. This one might be a good... This is probably a good follow-up to this one. So you know what? We'll do these tomorrow. Well, not tomorrow, but the next time we do YouTube videos. Yeah, that's good.
Choke point in the history of this country. We are living through a great choke point in the history of this country. What you saw in 2020 and its aftermath was a deeply Christian movement. The institutional character of Christianity is often rejected as part of the problem, a part of what has to be rejected, even though it is that institutional structure that has provided people with the ideological framework that enables them to judge it as evil. Essentially, what Christianity has that Islam does not is a concept of the secular. Islam is a totalizing way of leading your life. I think Islam is uniquely indigestible for a secular mindset, and people don't want to admit that.
If you've ever wanted to ask one of our guests a question, of this episode.
Tom Holland, welcome back to Trigonometry.
Thanks very much for having me back.
It's been a while. It's great to have you back on the show. In the meantime, by the way, you and Dominic, who's also a recent guest of ours, have had tremendous success. So congratulations on The Rest is History. It's absolutely
The
crushing.
Rest is History.
How are you handling your newfound fame?
Oh, I'm struggling. I'm really struggling. It's amazing. I mean, we never in a million years imagined that there was quite the appetite for history that there is. And so I'm happy not just for myself, not just for Dominic, but for history lovers everywhere, that they can be reassured that history, it really does seem to kind of tick people's boxes in a way that I had never, ever expected that it did.
Well, I think there's a resurgence in that. I don't think that's I don't think that would have been the case all the time. I think that's not new, but definitely, part of a cyclical thing. People are more interested in it now because the past looks a little bit rosier, especially for the UK.
There are a lot of memes online that by the time you're 40 years old, if you're male, this is a man by the time he's 40, he's either got to pick World War II or Roman history. Like, you don't have a choice, really.
Right.
We like both, so it's great to have you on.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
I think the meme I always had was that no male after the age of 40 reads a novel. And so maybe they turn to non-fiction, and history perhaps is a kind of obvious. And I kind of slightly sense that in myself. I read far fewer novels now than I did.
That's really true, actually, because I used to read. I was quite a voracious reader of novels, and the older I get, the more I veer towards non-fiction.
Yeah, so I was chair of the Society of the Authors, and they prepared a report on this, the gender imbalance, how it operated. And they kind of dug into the stats.
I understand.
And it was genuinely the case that the older men get, the less likely they are to read fiction, which, as a non-fiction writer, was obviously good news for me.
It is indeed. Well, look, it's great to have you on.
I suppose you could say that's because as a kid, you've basically read all the novels that there are. Might be different now because there's so many more things coming out. But yeah, like you've essentially read all the novels you want to read because you've read all the good ones already. And then you're like, okay, that was good. I got it. You'll read one every once in a while when it's like, brand new and incredible. And everybody says, you got to read it. This is incredible. This is great. It's amazing. But by the time you're, 40 or whatever, you've essentially already read all the ones. So to get new stuff, you kind of have to go into the nonfiction era, because nonfiction is like way more productive in the sense that there's way more to write about, because you could just write like about whatever new events that are coming out.
Last book, Dominion, we talked about it last time, but it's something we want to come back to a little bit in this conversation and talk about the history of Christianity, but also Islam you've written about too. But starting with Christianity, the thesis of your book essentially is that Christianity is the soup we swim in the Western world.
Yeah, it's the water. We're goldfish, and Christianity is essentially
the soup
water we're swimming in.
It's the air you're breathing. Yeah.
Talk to us, because one of the things I think very few people now understand is how remarkable the mentality shift that came with Christianity was, and how different Christian civilization is to the pre-Christian civilization in terms of its values, in terms of the things that it thought were important, in terms of things that it...
I'll be totally honest, this was not what I was thinking. I thought this was going to be a little bit more about history stuff. But I guess this is more about going to be Christianity and stuff, which I'm cool with.
Believed about, human beings and how they ought to act and what they ought to value and so on.
Yeah, it is radically different. But just to presage what I'm going to say about that, by pointing out that obviously nothing comes from nothing. Christianity emerges from a particular matrix that you get in first century AD Mediterranean. There are all kinds of influences on it. The Jewish, most obviously, but also Greek, Persian, and the fact that it is born into the Roman Empire. I think without the Roman Empire, it would not have happened. And on the topic of the Roman Empire, I guess the clearest demonstration of the the vibe shift, if you want to call it that,
Yeah, let's call it
is
that.
to look at the classic emblem of Christianity, which is the cross.
Mm.
And the cross is, for the Romans, it's an expression of their right to torture to death anyone who opposes their rule.
Right. And I mean, this is kind of we talked about it when we were looking at Civilization, where he was talking about, you know, the earliest depiction of the crucifixion being really late, like being like, I think it was like 900 AD, something like that. If you had anything earlier, it was barely like a crucifixion. It was very different. But the thing is that there's actually even, you know, earlier depictions of the crucifixion, but they are to mock Christianity. They're not there as a symbol of the faith to inspire or recruit. They are there to dissuade you from it, going like, look at this. This is a joke. What kind of a religion would have, you know, this person, you know, this dead, you know, person who's been tortured and humiliated, like, you know, this guy, this is your God. It's a joke.
It is the fate that is visited, particularly paradigmatically, on slaves, because it is the most agonizing but also the most humiliating form of death imaginable. You are stripped naked. So, you know, if you think of pictures of Christ on the cross, he usually has a loincloth. He wouldn't have had a loincloth. He would have, you know, it would all have been exposed. And you are nailed or hung by ropes or suspended in a wide variety of ways. There's no kind of set way of crucifying someone. And you are then a kind of public spectacle. You're like a kind of billboard advertising the power of the state that has put you there. And you can be, you know, you can't ward the birds off as they flock around your eyes and peck them out. You're constantly levering yourself up and down to try and keep your breath. Your suffering and your agony is on absolutely public display, and perhaps when you die, you're left there like a slab of meat. So it is an excruciating, agonizing, horrific death. And what Christianity does is to turn that value system on its head and to say that the person who's crucified triumphs over the person who's crucified him. And the scale of that value shift, I think, is illustrated by the way in which, in the early decades and centuries of Christianity, the fact that Jesus died on the cross is a cause of deep anxiety, or at least embarrassment.
Yeah, exactly.
To Christians who are talking about it. So the earliest Christian writer that we have, the earliest evidence for Christianity, written evidence, is Paul. And in his letters, he situates the death of Christ on the cross at the center of what he is preaching. But he is also kind of embarrassed about it. And so he says that to the Jews, or the Judeans, as I'd rather call them, it's a stumbling block, his message, but to everybody else, to the Greeks and to the Romans, it's just madness. And the reason for that is that for the Romans, what Paul is preaching, the idea that a man can also be a god, I mean, that's not news, because Julius Caesar had become a god. Augustus is worshipped as a god. That's not the madness of it. The madness is the idea that someone who had suffered this death, that paradigmatically is visited on slaves, is a god. That's the lunacy of it. And you sense that Paul is, you know, constantly trying to preempt objections to that kind of position of madness. And it's something that continues throughout Christian.
Where it's like, you know, the quality of godhood is like, you know, strength, is power, is success, is, you know, the ability to dominate others. That's just like, it's obvious. It's so, you know, it's completely, totally obvious. And it's like, you know, that's, you look at that and you'd go, yeah, I mean, like, you know, there's a reason why slavery was like a universal human enterprise. And it's the Christian societies that stopped it. And they stopped it, you know, because of moral reasons. Because it, you know, it disagreed with the basic cultural tenets inspired by the religion.
Writings throughout the 2nd century into the 3rd century, and even when Constantine in the beginning of the 4th century converts to Christianity, and Christianity starts to emerge as the you know, as something that is first of all permitted and then becomes kind of the state ideology. There's still a reluctance to illustrate Christ on the cross. And when you, so there's an ivory casket in the British Museum which illustrates various scenes from the Passion, and you have Jesus on the cross there. He looks unbelievably buff. He's got his loincloth on, and he looks like he looks like an athlete.
I don't know. I mean, this is relatively 420 to 430 AD. I kind of feel like this is just the fact that, like, they didn't have a great carving tradition at that point, you know?
He looks like someone who's winning first prize in the Olympics.
He looks like an Instagram influencer.
He looks, yeah, well, he looks like a footballer. You know, he's kind of toned, he's muscular, he's relaxed. He's got this kind of completely mellow expression on his face. He does not look like someone who's worried about birds coming and pecking out his eyeballs.
That's fair.
And
the stoicism of it, I can see. Let's look back. Yeah. So the stoicism on his face, I can see. He's an athlete, he's toned, he's this stuff. No. That is, I don't really see that. I think that's going to be much more of just the consequence of the fact that, you know, 420, 430 AD, the human image being carved or drawn or anything like that was super rudimentary. Like you just didn't see it that much. It was not good. It wasn't until, like, you know, later in the period that you would have more sort of anatomically correct stuff. And therefore, you know, this kind of version of him is like more simplistic and more just kind of like, you know, blocky. So it's easier to draw and carve out something that looks a little bit more muscular, looks a little bit more, you know, even, looks a little bit more toned. And again, because it's more blocky.
He's got this kind of completely mellow expression on his face. He does not look like someone who's worried about birds coming
stoicism,
and pecking out his eyeballs.
That I can see.
And so even there,
but again, even in something like that, like, you know, trying to express emotion via, you know, like super delicate facial expressions and carvings and like positions and these types of things, that's not something you would expect from, you know, 420 AD. You wouldn't expect it that early in the Western artistic tradition.
Don't have, the artist is reluctant to portray the reality of crucifixion.
You can kind of see
it's
that.
Not for another 500 years, not until just.
Yeah, but I mean, again, I'm like, this is the difference between like historian and an art historian. I think an art historian would make a better case for this, or would have like a better take on this. Would have something that's more rooted in like what was the artistic tradition that this was being produced in. Was the person who carved that capable? Like, was there any way that they would have had the techniques, the tools, or even just sort of like the idea to portray like a lot of sort of humanizing, realistic musculature, twists, poses, facial expressions, these things. It's like you don't really see a lot of that early in Western art. And or I shouldn't say that early, in that period of Western art. You just don't see it. Like, they were not really good at it. They just couldn't do it. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm definitely correct.
Before the first millennium, you get the first representations of Christ dead on the cross. And then over the course of the Middle Ages, so the High Middle Ages, the culture of Latin Christendom becomes increasingly obsessed with the sufferings of Christ. So it's portrayed in art, but it's also in the liturgy, it's in prayers, it dominates the Christian imagination. And I think that the long-term consequence of that is that we as a civilization, people growing up in a world that's still powerfully informed by Christianity, we've been desensitized to what the cross represents. You know, we see it as a kind of abstract expression of Christianity. We don't stop to think, that's that. You know, people have said, oh, it's like having, you know, the electric chair as a symbol of your faith. There's something of that. But it is much, much worse to be crucified than to die in the electric chair.
Tom, come back with me to what you said earlier, which I thought fascinating, because we talked about the moral inversion, the flipping of morality almost. And what we mean by this is effectively in the civilization in which Jesus was born and lived, the idea was that it was the strong conquer and win and the weak suffer what they must, or whatever that phrase is, effectively, right? It's the ideology that Nietzsche then kind of reinstated later in the 20th century, which was this idea that, you know, the strong must get what they want.
It's like, you know, the might makes right, right makes might. The people that are right will be strong because they are right. That is, you know, it is their birthright to be born into something strong, then therefore they will be something right, or something that is morally correct will be strong. Your God will provide you victory in battle, victory in material things, and that is why you win. You win because, you know, Apollo deemed it so. You won because Odin deemed you the morally superior individual. And you can tell that by the fact that you killed your opponent in this duel.
And the weak are going to suffer, and it's good to be strong and it's bad to be weak. And you say this was already there. It came from something that was already there in Roman society, in the Greek society, in the Jewish traditions that these people lived within. So how does that happen?
No, I'm not exactly saying that.
Okay, correct.
I'm saying that there are, if you think of Christianity as a great sea, there are many rivers that flow into it. So there's the obviously the kind of the Jewish inheritance, the scriptural inheritance, and with from Greece there is the philosophical tradition. So the influence of Aristotle and Plato on Christianity as it evolves is absolutely immense. There's a sense in which a lot of theology is just kind of footnotes to Plato, like philosophy is. The influence of Persia. The Persians have this idea that the universe is moralized, that there are rival principles of dark and light, of lies and truth, and this seems to be a big influence on the formation of Hebrew scripture, because people from Jerusalem are taken as prisoners to Babylon, and then Babylon gets captured by the Persians, and they're allowed to go back and rebuild the temple.
That's what I'm wondering
Jerusalem
about.
and
Yeah.
Cyrus.
600 BC. Okay, that's what I'm wondering about. Is I was gonna say I thought the Persian stuff was like way earlier. The Zoroastrianism stuff. I'm gonna actually double check that. Yeah, the Zoroastrianism stuff. I feel like that was way earlier stuff, right? Am I crazy? Iranian stuff, mid 6th century BCE. Yeah. Way earlier. And then you figure the earliest Hebrew stuff, I want to say is, I want to say 2000. I want to say 3000. Oh, so no. 6th century. Okay, this is saying origin is 6th century BC. So right at like the exact same time as Zoroastrianism. 6th century, mid 6th. Yeah, so basically at like the exact same time. So Zoroastrianism would have been, which does actually, if we're going to be totally honest here, that makes total sense. This is the Persian stuff, the Zoroastrianism stuff is informing Jewish stuff, is informing Judaism. And then in the sense that, that early Hebrew stuff flows into Christianity, you could say the Persian stuff is there. But it's kind of like it's already been changed into, it's already been absorbed into and inculcated, and how can we describe it? It's already, it's been transformed into a Hebrew form, into a Jewish form.
The first great Persian king is hailed in the Bible as a Messiah, as a kind of a liberator. So that's also a crucial part of it. And then what Rome provides, I think, is the notion of a universal order.
Because I don't know, so the other thing that he mentions in there is Greek stuff. So like the Plato, Aristotle, that stuff. Obviously, that stuff's later. That stuff, if I'm not mistaken, is like 200, 300. Yeah, so like 200 years, 250 years later. Yeah, something around those lines. So, this would have been much closer to the start of Christianity. Judaism would have already been extant for 200 to 300 years. It would have had its own stuff. And that, to me, I want to say kind of does... Because I don't see... it's not to say there's none. It's not to say there's no Greek influence that you can see in Jewish religious stuff, but I feel like I see more of it in Christianity than Judaism.
So the ideology of Rome is that they have imperium sine fine, as Virgil called it, empire without limit. The remit of Rome is universal, and that is something that Christianity kind of takes for granted, that there is a universal global order. And Paul's ability to write his letters to the Galatians or the Ephesians or the Corinthians or the Romans reflects that. The Mediterranean has become a Roman lake. The shipping lanes can be used without fear of pirates attacking you, and roads are being built and you can travel on them. It's a globalized world, and so that also is part of the kind of the Christian context. The idea that someone who has suffered the death of a slave.
So yeah, so I'm curious about why he's saying the globalizing nature of it. Is this going to be about like the fact that Christianity is going to be for all people? It needs to be kind of a universalizing religion. It's going to need to be open to other things and being able to absorb them. I'm not totally sure. I mean, certainly, obviously, yes, it's part of the context that it comes up in, but I'm not sure how it influences Christianity.
Could in some way be the universal God who has created everything. That is the that's what's novel, that's what's radical. Although having said that, I think when you look at Paul's letters, so the tradition of Paul, as it's embodied in the Acts of the Apostles, and Paul talks about it himself in his letters, is that he was a persecutor of the church. He obviously thought the Christian notion that Jesus had risen from the dead and was in some way a part of God was powerfully offensive. And then he has a vision of the risen Christ, he says. And I think in the aftermath of that experience, he goes away and he reads through the scriptures to try and make sense of what he has seen. And it's like being given being given the key to a detective story, where you go back and you realize that all kinds of things, you've been thrown off the scent. You've missed what the actual solution to the puzzle is. And I think that's the key that Paul is bringing to Hebrew scriptures. And he's realizing that all the promises that he had thought were contained in scripture, that a powerful warlord would come to redeem God's people. But actually that wasn't what the key was. The key was that the Messiah would come, but he would come as a man of sorrows. And so he is drawing on the inheritance of Hebrew scripture. It is there. But what Christianity does is to kind of enshrine it at the molten heart of
a different thing.
The gospel, euangelion, the good news that Paul is preaching.
I really like that we've talked about the difference between the Christian God and the gods that preceded it. Because if you know anything about Roman gods or Greek gods from which they were based on, they come across as petty.
I think they come across as unbelievably charismatic.
Really?
They come across as human.
Surely.
Petty, definitely. I would say petty. Charismatic, I understand charismatic too, but they come across as very human, very down to earth, very uncelestial, you know, very unremoved. They're very much, you know, part of the world. It's just like, oh, okay, it's a more powerful, intense world. But yeah,
well, the charismatic pettiness, perhaps you might say. You see, as a child, I went to church and went to Sunday school, and I loved the Bible stories. I mean, I thought they were great, but I was always very much on the side of the great empires. So I was very much kind of Team Pharaoh as opposed to Moses, and loved the Assyrians, loved the Babylonians. You know, very much pro Pontius Pilate as opposed to Jesus.
Jeez,
And
okay.
One of the reasons for that was that I found their gods kind of more glamorous and exciting. So everything that
that's true.
Were condemning.
That's absolutely
true.
True.
Egypt or Babylon as
no, I mean the mythology of one is far more engaging. That's not even a question. It's not even a question that, like, you know, if we're talking about, you know, oh, the Greek gods, the Roman gods, the Egyptian gods, you name it, they are cooler. They are cooler, but I think the pettiness is there. The pettiness is there, and again, they're cooler because they are more human. But it does also mean that, you know, the religion surrounding them is more empty. The mythology is cooler. The religion's less cool. The mythology of, like, Christian tradition, it's not to say that there's none of it, but it's, you know, unless you get really deep into it and you're like, okay, like the orders of angels and like all these different kinds of stuff, it's kind of bereft. It doesn't have the same flavor. It's not as cool. But the religion that comes out of it is better. As opposed, you know, it's the opposite with like the Greek, Roman religions. They're just less interesting.
So much stock and stone that it's, you know, they're just great idols and things. I'd love an idol. I thought that was much more kind of glamorous than what we got in the church. And specifically, I loved the gods of Greece.
Sure.
I found them so much more charismatic. But you're right. I mean, they're terrible. They're awful. But in a way, a god like Athena seemed to me to correspond much more closely to how I felt the world was. You know, she's very, very smart. She's also very violent. She encourages all the arts of civilization, but she's also unbelievably petty, as you say. You know, if you offend her, she will inflict appalling things on you, but she looks after
Turn
her
you into
own.
a spider.
And I kind of always felt as a child that if Athena had been a viable faith alternative, I would absolutely have gone for her. And I think the sense that the philosophers have, so going back to the 6th century, and then through to Plato and Aristotle and to the particularly the Stoics, that they are reacting as you do. That Plato famously says we shouldn't have poets in our ideal republic because the poets make you feel the charisma of these gods. And
Bad
they are
people.
not worthy of being followed or worshipped, and that the true divine lies beyond these stories. And
again, I mean, this is kind of this is why that religion, the Greek Roman religion, is around for what? A couple hundred years? Christianity is around for 2,000. Judaism is around for, 2,600, 3,000 years. Yeah, it's like the mythology, the stories are better, but the religion is worse, because the religion, the aspect of these things that makes them kind of more interesting stories, makes them more engaging, makes them more charismatic, makes them, cooler, also makes them not objects of worship. They're not things that you can actually, like, point your North Star to. Point to as your North Star.
Essentially, it's that understanding of the divine that Christian theologians then kind of adopt and bundle into the package. So you could, in that sense, say that the Greek gods, in a kind of weird way, are the malign step-parents of Christianity, that it's the rejection of them. I mean, in an Oedipal way, very good.
I can see it.
The rejection of the philosophers of that kind of quality of the Greek gods is there. And it's interesting. I mean, obviously, this is crucially a part of the context, again, into which Christianity is born. So when Paul has his vision of Christ, according to Acts, Christ says to him, Paul, why are you kicking against the pricks? Why are you kicking against what I'm giving you? And this is a phrase that comes from Euripides' great play, The Bacchae, which describes Dionysus appearing, and there are people who reject him. And the fate that is visited on them is terrible. So Pentheus, the king of Thebes, who is Dionysus's cousin, refuses to recognize his cousin as a god. I mean, as he would if your cousin turns up and says he's god. And he suffers a terrible fate. He, his aunts go mad, roam the countryside, tearing cattle to pieces and throwing bits of flesh all over the trees and things. Pentheus tries to arrest them. Dionysus
turning into what is it? I want to say it's like a naiad. No.
Drives him mad. He
What the
dresses
hell am I
up as a
thinking of?
maid.
Euripides. Bacchae. Euripides. Okay, can we just go Euripides? Let's check. The Bacchae. I misspelled that a little bit. Plot. The women fell upon the animals. The Sparagamos. Who are the Maenads? There we go. Could not remember what the hell they were called. Maenads.
So
That's
he
it.
goes to a rave. So he dresses up in whatever the Maenads are wearing, kind of animal skins. He goes up to try and spy on his mother and his aunts, and they see him and rip him to pieces as though so he's a wild animal. This is obviously not what Christ is doing to Paul, but there are clearly resemblances between a god, say, like Dionysus, and Christ that even Paul can recognize.
How often do you get the chance to act as offering with its left hand today? So from the
going over Greek and Roman history with the gods, the one word that stood out to me was cruelty. It was they're viciously cruel. Take the story of Prometheus. It gave fire to the human beings, doomed to have, I think it was an eagle rip out his heart every day. His liver to be ripped out. But then you contrast that.
He grows back every day, and then the eagle comes back and rips it out.
He liked to die of offal. Anyway, but you had like Jesus, who, when he was dying, said to God, whilst he was suffering the most horrendous and brutal of fates, on the cross, forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they do. That is a radical transformation, isn't it?
That's a big difference.
That's a radical difference.
Yes, it's very radical. And you mentioned Nietzsche. I mean, this is what Nietzsche fixes on. I said how we've become desensitized to the cross. I think it's amazing that Nietzsche, who is the most brilliant of all atheist writers who've emerged in the West,
I would agree.
He gets the cross. He gets what is radical and subversive about the cross.
I'm not even sure if I don't even know if I would say he's atheist. I don't know if I would say Nietzsche is atheist. I think he's kind of he's I understand why people would say he's atheist, because Nietzsche certainly is kind of a progenitor of that, of the culture that's produced atheism. But I don't know if he's actually an atheist. because he was, if I'm not mistaken, he was like a monk beforehand. I think he had faith. I think he was basically just like no one else does. I think he actually was not atheist. I think he actually had theistic views. I could be wrong. Maybe he's got specific writings that says that stuff, but like the majority of my view on him is that he's basically upset that other people don't actually hold this faith to be true. They say they do, but they don't actually act like they believe it. And therefore, if they don't, act like they believe it, they don't believe it. And if they don't believe it, then it's not true. And it's, you're living in a world in which you're kind of just miming stuff, and eventually it's going to fall apart. And I think he's decrying that. I think he's upset that's the case. He's like, no. We would rather live in a world where people actually genuinely believe this, as opposed to just acting like they did.
Theologians haven't really articulated for centuries and centuries. There is something of Paul's bewilderment and perplexity and shock at contemplating the death of Christ on the cross about Nietzsche, and he finds it repellent because he thinks that what he famously calls Christianity a slave religion, that it's a religion for the weak and the poor, and that its popularity is driven by the ressentiment, the not quite resentment, the kind of mingling of resentment and hostility that those who are weak feel for the strong. And Nietzsche thinks that the strong are healthy and that healthiness should be celebrated, and that if strength involves strapping up someone who has annoyed you to a rock and sending an eagle to devour his liver every day, well, brilliant, bring it on. Let's crack on.
But there's another aspect of Christianity which is very powerful. Where Constantine and I went to Sicily, and we did a guided tour of these Greek temples and Roman temples. And one of the things the guide said to us was, this was a place, the temple was a place for the high priests. This was a place for the upper echelons of religious society. Whereas the church is a place for everybody.
Well, I'm not sure that's entirely true. The temples and the shrines, say in Greece or Rome, particularly, let's look at Athens, the democracy in Athens.
Okay.
The temples are seen as, and the rituals and the rites that are practiced to keep Athena and the other gods happy, are fundamental to the health of the entire demos, the entire people.
Right.
And
that's kind of where I thought he was going with this.
Unless you buy into that, you don't understand what makes a city like democratic Athens tick. So the power, the kratia of the demos, we translate it as people power, and we think of it as democracy. But democracy in English is a kind of, it's a false friend. It doesn't mean what it meant for Athens. We tend to think democracy is founded on rights. People have a right to a vote. So therefore, the fact that men in Athens had a vote and women didn't is offensive to us. This is not how it operated in Athens, because the role of the men and women, all those who are sprung from the soil of Attica, are part of a continuum that reaches back into the past, forward into the future, and is in a kind of relationship with the gods. So the soil, the people, the gods. This is a kind of, it's an ecosystem in which everyone flourishes and everyone has their role. And the role of men in this ecosystem is to keep the demos, secure the demos against external enemies, so to go out and fight against rival cities, and also to draw up the laws that will enable the city to prosper in the kind of the dimension of the mortal. But just as important, or possibly even more important, is the role of keeping the gods on side. And in that, women have a very, very important role. They provide, they weave the robes that every...
So I suppose maybe where he's going with this here is like, it's the difference between democracy for us is about rights. You have the right to vote. You have the right to, do all these types of things. In the original, it's more about responsibilities. You don't have the right to vote. You have the responsibility to vote. You have the responsibility to act in the furtherance of your nation, as opposed to you have the right to. You have the right to serve. You have the right to become a politician and run for office and do these types of things. You have the right to vote. No. You have the responsibility. You have the responsibility to serve in the military, as opposed to the right to serve in the military.
Every year is given to one of the two statues on the Acropolis. So every fourth year there's an enormous one that goes to the statue of Athena in the Parthenon, and every year a slightly smaller one to the kind of the ancient wooden statue of the goddess. They feed the holy snakes on the Acropolis with cakes. They practice cults. So they the great festival of Dionysus, they welcome Dionysus in. And women go to a temple in the marshes to Dionysus, and there one of them has sex with a king, and nobody really knows what this involves, but I mean it's clearly something's going on there. And the thing I love is that every young girl in Athens, when she becomes 10, goes to this temple of Artemis, who, like Athena, is a kind of terrifying goddess, virgin goddess, mistress of the beasts, she's called. And girls go out there, and we're told in the classical sources that there they turn into bears. And scholars debate what does this mean? I mean, is it a puberty ritual? Do they put on the robes of the skins of bears or what? Nobody pauses to think, well, maybe they did turn into bears. But what if they did turn into bears? What if they did? They are then roaming with Artemis out in the wilds. They have experienced
Are there bears in Greece? Bears in Greece. Bears in Greece. The Eurasian bear. Huh. Okay, so there's the brown bear, Eurasian brown bear. They're pussies compared to American brown bears, obviously. Let's see. How big? Not looking huge. Let's see. How big are you? Fur's kind of big. The weight varies. Full-grown male. Maximum weight of 650, 2.5 meters. Psh, nothing. Let's try the American brown bear. Talk about a real brown bear, baby. Let's see. How big are these real boys? Most variable in size. 80 to 600 kilograms. 600 being a normal. Let's see. They are smallest brown bears. Are these actually not that big? Are they actually not bigger? No. Average? Oh man, maybe I was wrong. The Eurasian brown bear. 350 to 500. Okay, maybe they're bigger. Huh.
Have not experienced. And every man who marries a woman in Athens is marrying someone who's run with Artemis, who's run with the animals. And I think people believe that. And it gives a shiver of the supernatural and the weird to the functioning of Athens in its golden age that we find very difficult to get a handle on, because, of course, the instincts of historians are incredibly materialist, and even if they do believe in the supernatural, they don't believe in the Greek gods, but you've got to try and believe in them, and when you do, you see that it's part of the rhythm and the fabric of the functioning of the entire city. And this is why, in the long run, the philosophers are so threatening to that, because if you're turning around and saying, that's all rubbish, God is kind of perfection in some distant moral order or something. What role is there then for girls going off and turning into bears and running with Artemis?
Well, look, I'm no historian, but I'm fairly comfortable with the idea of women turning into bears every now and again. That is a familiar experience.
Of course.
But I was going to come back to Christianity because one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is, from my personal experience, I was surrounded by a lot of Orthodox Christians when I was growing up. My family Orthodox Christians, and one of the things I found quite incongruous was that there was a doctrine of what you're supposed to do, and then I'd observe people who
orthodoxy.
There was an orthodoxy that nobody actually did any of those things. They just talked about them. And one of the interesting things to me about Christianity is I imagine, you know, my Anglican friends, let's say, who are kind of very peaceful and docile, almost you might say, and very kind and generous, etc. That is not the way that Christianity has been practiced through the centuries in some parts of the world. So how, you know, the message of Jesus turning the other cheek and all these other things, that is not also the way that Christianity has been practiced throughout the ages either. There's been quite militant periods. There's been periods of internal persecution, of all sorts of recrimination between different branches, etc. How does all of that happen?
Well, humanity.
Christianity, I think, is best thought of as a kind of great pulsing matrix of paradoxes. Paradox,
I don't know about that,
structures everything about it. I mean, you know, we've been talking about one, the guy on the cross who proves to be greater than the person who's crucified him, the man who is also a god, and I guess that this is the kind of the Christian understanding of the divine, that in a sense paradox structures the inability of the human mind to contemplate the potency of the divine.
Certainly.
So
that's definitely my view on this, which is like not really the philosophical, theistic, apologist, whatever you're going to call it, view on it. Most people would be like, no, like God has to be intelligible. Most people would say that. Most people in the Christian tradition would say, you know, the paradox of like, can God make a stone so heavy he himself cannot lift it? It's like, oh, that is a paradox. It's like, right, but it's not actually a paradox because it's like, yeah, God can't do anything that's impossible. I do not subscribe to that. I have a different view on God. Or, you know, an omnipotent being.
There are many, many different ways of structuring and understanding what it is to be a Christian. And a lot of these are generated by the fact that, you know, and it's a crucial development that might not have happened, that in the 2nd century, there's a guy called Marcion who points out that
85
the God
to
of the
160.
New Testament seems quite different to the God of the Old Testament.
Yeah,
the Old Testament has
the God of the Old Testament.
He's busy, you know. King David holds a census, and God goes ballistic and kind of wipes all the children of Israel out with a plague. You know, there's a lot of smiting and that kind of thing going on. And now suddenly Jesus is saying, oh, you know, to turn the other cheek and put up your sword, and what's going on here? Right. And so Marcion's theory was that that the God of the Old Testament was a different, essentially a kind of subordinate angel who had usurped the true God's role, and that Jesus had therefore been sent by the true God to kind of put humanity back on the straight and narrow.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
He proposed that there should be a very finite number of scriptures. So the Gospel of Luke,
that's
Acts
really
of the Apostles,
interesting.
Some of the letters of Paul, basically. And this is a key moment.
The God of the Old Testament is a subordinate angel. Nope. Marcion. What is this guy? Of Sinope.
Role, and that Jesus had therefore been.
God had sent Jesus Christ, who is distinct from the vengeful God, the Demiurge, who had created the world. Okay. who had created the world. So God sent Jesus Christ. So the vengeful God, the demiurge, that is the God of the early, or the Old Testament. Interesting. He considers himself a follower of Paul the Apostle, whom he believed to have been the only true apostle of Jesus Christ. His doctrine is called Marcionism. Oh, I misspelled it. Marcion published the earliest record of a canon of New Testament books. Early church writers such as Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and Tertullian denounced Marcion as a heretic or antichrist, and he was excommunicated by the Church of Rome around 144. He published his own canon of Christian sacred scriptures, which contained blah, blah, blah. I wanted to see... I'm guessing you would say this is the Gnosticism. The teachings. Okay. Study of the Hebrew Bible, along with received writings circulating in the nascent church, led Marcion to conclude that many of the teachings of Jesus were incompatible with the actions of Yahweh, characterized as the belligerent God of the Hebrew Bible. Marcion responded by developing a ditheistic system of belief around the year 144. This notion of two gods, a higher transcendent one, and a lower world creator and ruler, allowed Marcion to reconcile his perceived contradictions between Christian covenant theology and the gospel proclaimed by the New Testament. In contrast to other leaders of the nascent Christian church, however, Marcion declared that Christianity was in complete discontinuity with Judaism and entirely opposed to the scriptures of Judaism. Marcion did not claim that these were false. Instead, he asserted that they were entirely true, but were to be read in an absolutely literalistic manner, one which led him to develop an understanding that Yahweh was not the same God spoken of by Jesus. For example, Marcion argued that the Genesis account of Yahweh walking through the Garden of Eden asking where Adam was proved that Yahweh inhabited a physical body and was without universal knowledge, attributes wholly incompatible with the Heavenly Father professed by Jesus. According to Marcion, the God of the Old Testament, whom he called the Demiurge, the creator of the material universe, is a jealous tribal deity of the Jews, whose law represents legalistic, reciprocal justice, and who punishes mankind for its sins through suffering and death. In contrast, the God that Jesus professed is an altogether different being, a universal God of compassion and love, who looks upon humanity with benevolence and mercy. Marcion also produced a book titled Antitheses, which is no longer extant, contrasting the demiurge of the Old Testament with the Heavenly Father of the New Testament. Marcion held Jesus to be the Son of the Heavenly Father, but understood the incarnation in a docetic manner, i.e., that Jesus' body was only an imitation of a material body, and consequently denied Jesus' physical and bodily birth, death, and resurrection. Marcion was the first to codify a Christian canon. His canon consisted of only 11 books, grouped into two sections: the Evangelicon, badass in name, a shorter version of the Gospel of Luke, and the Apostolikon, a selection of 10 epistles of Paul the Apostle, which were also slightly shorter than the canonical text. Early Christians, such as Irenaeus, Tertullian, and Epiphanius, claimed that Marcion's editions of Luke and the Pauline epistles were intentionally edited by Marcion to match his theological views, and many modern scholars agree. However, some argue that Marcion's texts were not substantially edited by him and may in some respects represent an earlier version of these texts than the canonical versions. It's a possibility. Like the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel used by Marcion did not contain elements relating to Jesus' birth and childhood. Interestingly, it did contain some Jewish elements and material that challenged Marcion's ditheism, a fact that was utilized by early Christians in their articulations against Marcion. The centrality of the Pauline epistles in Marcion's canon reflects the fact that Marcion considered Paul to be the correct interpreter and transmitter of Jesus' teachings, in contrast to the 12 disciples and the early Jerusalem church. In Marcion's view, the other apostles were under the auspices of the demiurge. And then Gnosticism here. Marcion is sometimes described as a Gnostic philosopher. In some essential respects, Marcion proposed ideas which aligned well with Gnostic thought. Like the Gnostics, he believed that this world was not the creation of the one true God. However, Marcionism conceptualizes God in a way which cannot be reconciled with broader Gnostic thought. For Gnostics, some human beings are born with a small piece of God's soul lodged within their spirit, akin to the notion of the divine spark. God is thus intimately connected to and part of his creation. Salvation lies in turning away from the physical world, which Gnostics regard as an illusion, and embracing the godlike qualities within oneself. Marcion, by contrast, held that the Heavenly Father, the Father of Jesus Christ, was an utterly alien God. He had no part in making the world, nor any connection with it. Well, other than Jesus, then. According to Bart Ehrman, Marcion himself should not be thought of as a Gnostic. He held that there were only two gods, not many. He did not think of this world as a cosmic disaster, but as the creation of the Old Testament God, and he did not think divine sparks resided in human bodies that could be set free by understanding the true gnosis. Moreover, his docetic view does not appear to have been the typical view of Gnostics. Very interesting. Yeah, and then I've got to click on this. The Evangelicon. That's just such a badass name. I had to click on it. All right, it's not. I'm not going through the whole thing.
Sent by the true God to kind of put humanity back on the straight and narrow.
But I would tend to agree with that. It doesn't sound like the Marcion guy was a Gnostic. The Gnostic stuff is like very specific.
And he proposed that there should be a very finite number of scriptures. So the Gospel of Luke, Acts of the Apostles, some of the letters of Paul, basically. And this is a key moment, because I think you can already by this point talk about Orthodox Christians who embody the kind of the mainstream of, or at least the kind of the central gravity in the church. They do not follow that. But because of this challenge, they have to decide what is the canon going to be, what are our scriptures going to be, and they choose the four Gospels because these are the ones that are the most closest to the time. They're the ones that are generally accepted as being the most authentic record, and the various letters of Paul and the Book of Revelation and so on. And they also decide to keep what they come to term the Old Testament, and the sense that God had prefigured the coming of Christ in the Hebrew Scriptures. And by doing that, it sets up opportunities for Christians to emphasize things that perhaps aren't being emphasized in the passion narratives. Let's put it like that.
Well, what I'm getting at, Tom, is let me put it more bluntly.
I was gonna say, I'm like he's what Constantine was talking about is the sort of the Nietzschean stuff, which is like people will mouth that they believe in these types of things, but they won't act like it. Or they will act like a thing is true when people are looking. They will act like it. They will pretend that they believe this, but they don't actually believe it. And therefore, when push comes to shove, they don't act in accordance with their beliefs or with their professed beliefs.
You're very eloquent and a historian. What I'm saying is,
people
you
are
might understand.
Why have Christians behaved in a monstrous way throughout history?
For example, I guess what I'm saying is, my experience of Christians today is that if somebody stood up and went, you know what, these people are heretics and they must be eradicated, most Christians would be like, well, that's a bit much. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's been a long process of weathering and transformation. And the thing is that Christianity isn't it's a constantly, it's best thought of, I think, as a kind of civilization.
You would, you know, things evolve and change,
But
and
this
different emphases are happening all the time.
But this is why I'm asking, because when you talk to Christians today, they will say compare it to Islam, right? If you say, well, Islam is not as drastic today as it was when it was first created, probably true, and process of weathering is perfect explanation to my layman understanding. You probably rip into this, right? But with Christianity, there was the message of compassion and empathy and turning the other cheek and all of that from the beginning. So what is it that's being weathered over the 2,000 year
Okay, so go back to the issue of paradox. Paul in his letters, writing to the Galatians.
I mean, you could say weathering, and it's like weathering's not just going to wear stuff down; it's going to build other stuff up.
So this is really, I mean, might even be among the earliest of letters. So right at the start of the Christian tradition, he writes to them and he says that in Christ there is no Jew or Greek, there is no man or woman, there is no slave or free. So he's dissolving the traditional boundaries that have separated, you know, the two sexes, the different peoples of the world, and the different social orders.
It's very progressive.
Well, he's saying in Christ Jesus. I mean, he's not. The world is fallen. These differences and what stems from these differences are part of the lot of the children of Adam and Eve. You know, we're all part of this fallen world. I mean, that's the gist. But that in Christ, they will be dissolved. This is the heaven that is promised. Now, of course, there is. It's like an acorn from which a great oak will flourish. And I would say that the assumptions that govern a liberal society derive from that. The idea that men and women have an inherent equality, that differences between peoples are iniquitous to emphasize. I mean, we'll come to slavery.
You would say that
in due course,
that is a
but the
Christian
idea that there should be. I mean, you can see that there is no slave or free. It feeds in the long run into abolitionism. It feeds into the French Revolution, to the Russian Revolution. I mean, these are
even just ideas of like
long-term
justice.
Consequences. I mean, another metaphor, I love mixing up the metaphors, would be that is a grumbling of the earth, a grinding of the tectonic plates, and in due course, Tokyo gets drowned by a tsunami. It's that kind of. That's what it is. But right from the beginning, there is a problem with one of those in particular, which is Paul's assertion that there is no Jew or Greek. He writes it, what he means is a Judean or Greek. He is a Judean. He's from Judea. He's therefore a provincial like any other. You know, there are all kinds of people, Judeans, Egyptians, whatever. And he's comparing them to the Greeks. And he's saying that the differences between Judeans and Greeks will dissolve in Christ, i.e. there will be a kind of universal brotherhood, sisterhood, whatever. However, famously, not all Judeans are keen on having their sense of distinctiveness dissolved into a kind of
it's
universal
like a no nationalism
mush.
type thing.
And so they do not, in the main, follow Paul's exhortation to accept Christ as Lord. And that then means that there is a fracture point right from the beginning between people who will come to be defined as Christians and Jews. And that is obviously an incredibly dark shadow.
I was gonna say, like, why? Yeah, like, why is he saying Judeans? Like, I assumed he was saying Judeans because, you know, he was talking about like a region, a nation, and that type of thing, as opposed to the early Christian people that were also Judean, that were like, you know, we would call Jewish, and we would say, okay, well, like, you know, Jesus wasn't a Jew, wasn't Jewish, he was Judean, because it's an entirely different thing. Yeah.
Over the entire course of Christianity. But you can see how what seems to us a progressive message has kind of led to what we could also see as very dark consequences. And that is just one verse.
We're not a book. That's funny. We're totally not seeing any other results of that, of progressive ideology giving us dark material outcomes.
New Testament, which in turn is part of, you know, includes the Old Testament. There is a lot of material there that can provide sanction for a broad array of responses, and that can also set in train all kinds of trends that, you know, would have seemed unimaginable in the 1st century AD.
Tom, is that why, so everyone can drink? So my mother's Venezuelan, and it's really fascinating to see the way that the Spanish conquistadors behaved in South America and the Portuguese empire behaved in South America, and they come from a Catholic tradition, to the way that the British Empire behaved. Was that a large part of the way they behaved based on religion, or was there something else to it?
Well, the Spanish are...
I mean, go a little bit further into what you mean by behave.
The first to discover great powers in a world that no one had imagined before. And so when they conquered the Aztec Empire and then the Inca Empire, I mean, I don't know if you played, you know, a game like Civilization.
Oh, yeah.
Colonization, which is very problematic.
But Civilization,
it was a great game.
Civilization, you could end up with tanks attacking archers.
Yes.
And that's basically what you have, because...
Okay, badass. Now I like this guy. Now I like this guy. He's talking about video games.
Civilization, I mean, beautiful, fascinating, extraordinary, but collapses before everything that the Spanish bring, because they're the kind of beneficiaries of thousands of years of Eurasian, you know, crops and cattle and all kinds of things like that.
Yeah, Mexico's not in any way, shape, or form like a nice place to grow stuff.
And this innate, and obviously the Spanish interpret this as an expression of kind of God's
favor
plan. You know, they're bringing Christ to people who had previously walked in darkness.
If you're someone who values
freedom,
they genuinely seeking to expand in the New World for religious reasons, or was there a lot of pragmatism to it? You know,
obviously it varies. I mean, the conquistadors are unbelievably brutal in the main, and if they hadn't been brutal, then they wouldn't have done what they did. You know, they wouldn't have conquered what they.
There you go. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, they wouldn't have won. They wouldn't have survived.
Ended up conquering. The lust for gold becomes notorious. It is absolutely about wanting material goods, but to imagine that the desire to win souls for Christ is simply cynical window dressing is that's a very anachronistic take. There are absolutely people who are going out there who feel that this is absolutely part of God's plan, and there are friars, of whom the most famous is a guy called Bartolomé de las Casas.
Spanish lawyer, clergyman, writer, and activist, 1484 to 1566. Damn, he lived for a while.
Who condemns the oppression and the greed of the conquistadors as an offense against God. And there is a great kind of scholarly debate in Spain between those who are drawing on Greek philosophers, particularly Aristotle, to essentially, you know, the strong do what they will, the weak must suck it up kind of argument, that there are those who are destined to be slaves and there are those who are destined to be masters, and they're drawing on Greek philosophy for that. And then there's Las Casas who's saying, no, he's drawing on the Gospels. He's saying, no, slavery is an evil. These are people who are as worthy of respect as anyone else who has been won for Christ. They must be won for Christ. And you can see there the beginnings of kind of ideas that will feed ultimately into kind of notions of international law. And that's a Catholic perspective. The British obviously are Protestant, and therefore they bring a slightly different perspective. One perspective is that the Spanish are evil.
Right.
So what they call the Black Legend, the idea that the Spanish are uniquely appalling, which is often they're drawing on Las Casas and other Spanish writers like him to kind of condemn the Spanish. I mean, it's very much kind of Protestant black propaganda, I think. But the British have their own route to deciding that slavery is wrong. It's as Christian as the Spanish one, but it's distinctively Protestant. And what you have with the kind of radical form of Protestantism that develops in England in the Civil War and then the Commonwealth and its aftermath is this notion that
the Civil War, the English Civil War, are we talking like Mary Queen of Scots, I'm guessing, and then Elizabeth II? English Civil War. Let's check. I think that's the one I'm thinking of. 1642. It's got to be, because I mean, look, obviously this is the UK. All these people are living in the UK. At least one of them has like a UK accent. So I'm assuming he got UK history, English history. So where is this? The Royalists, the Parliamentarians, the King of England. Let's think. Charles Robert Devereux. Is this what I'm thinking of? First English Civil War? No, I'm thinking of something else then. I was thinking this was after, like, Henry VIII starts Anglicanism. Because there is, you know, obviously there is, like, to a degree, a civil war between Mary Queen of Scots and then Elizabeth I. Guess that's something else then. Okay.
The Spirit descends on you and enables you to read Scripture in the way that it's meant to be properly understood. So the simple words on the page, you know, this is inadequate to properly understand it. You have to have the Spirit. You have to have been granted grace by the Spirit, by God. And when you do that, then you can see what it properly means. And this revolution in England is transported to the Caribbean, and it's transported to the American colonies. And so Quakers are the most obvious example, but Baptists and people like that. And this coincides with the development of plantation slavery in the Caribbean and in the American colonies. And Britain is starting to industrialize by this point, and industrialization is about utilizing resources in a way that is more intensive than has ever been done before. And what that means for slaves is obviously horrendous, because you industrialize the process of transporting slaves, of exploiting them, of working them. So you have the conjunction of that, the industrialization of slavery, and the this radical notion that you can only understand God's purpose by reading the Scriptures with a sense of the Spirit. And it combines to inspire in Quakers and evangelical Anglicans a sense that slavery is wrong, even though famously, notoriously even, nowhere in the Bible does it say that slavery is wrong. Slavery is taken for granted in the Bible because it's seen as, you know, in the way the fact that hunger is, or poverty or homelessness or whatever. It's just part of the human condition.
Yeah.
But radical Protestants in the 18th century and then into the early 19th century are saying, no, actually, it may not say this, but I feel the Spirit is telling me slavery is wrong.
Okay, so that's the justification
and it spreads
for it.
like a wildfire.
It's just
and
like
the
an
Spirit
intuitive.
is conceptualized by Christians as fire, Pentecostal fire. So it's literally this kind of Pentecostal fire blazing across the Atlantic in Britain, in the Caribbean, in the North American colonies, particularly in the northern colonies. And it inspires the first great activist movement in Britain.
That's interesting, because I mean that basically is saying, like, you know, the intuition is the thing that abolishes slavery. Is that just the general idea of it? Your kind of gut feeling towards slavery is like, is that it's wrong. And it's like, okay, well, if that's the case, then I mean, you've got to imagine that gut feeling. If it was a universal thing, then every single human being before Christianity existed would have felt the same thing and would have, done the same thing, which is like, all right, well, we're just not going to have slaves. So there is something, therefore, different about the, culture that informs these intuitive leaps for Christianity as opposed to, everything else. That's interesting.
You have people writing to their MPs. You have demonstrations going through the streets of London demanding the abolition of slavery. And it becomes so unignorable for the government that in 1814, Napoleon has been defeated and sent off to Elba. There's this Congress in Vienna to redraw the map of Europe. And Lord Castlereagh, the Foreign Secretary, has to go to Vienna and basically says, guys, I'm really sorry, but I've got all these guys who are, people in London who are holding street demonstrations and things. We've got to sort this out. We've got to abolish the slave trade. And this carries on even, through Waterloo and the second defeat of Napoleon. And the Protestant tradition that Castlereagh is representing is obviously means nothing to the Catholic powers, to the French, to the Spanish, to the Portuguese. So they draw on those traditions that Las Casas had been articulating. So Catholic traditions, and it gets blended with the Protestant traditions, and so also do the radical traditions of the Revolution, the French Revolution, kind of the radicalism of that, because the French Revolution had abolished slavery in the Caribbean, and then Napoleon had brought it back in. So so essentially, it's a pooling of these three traditions, all of which are bred of the marrow of Christian Europe, the Protestant, the Catholic, and the kind of the Enlightenment tradition, if you want to call it that. And
interesting.
This is what gives birth essentially to the concept of international law, the idea that there are principles that...
I love that. I'm pretty sure the first question here was that sets him off down this thing is like, how, people will say one thing but then do another. What is that with Christianity?
Transcend religious doctrine, so that a Protestant and a Catholic can equally accept the dictates of international law. And this is what enables British ships, when they are patrolling the Atlantic, that gives them the legal right to stop Portuguese or Spanish slave ships and arrest those who are doing it and, say, put them on the coast of Cuba and try them under international law. And it also provides a rubric for what then happens in the 19th century when the British start to go on the attack against the Muslim slave trade, because, of course, Muslims have very different sanctions for slavery. And so the process by which Muslim powers come to accept that slavery is an evil kind of requires them to accept the primacy of international law, which is a massive, massive deal for Muslims because they have a framework of law that derives supposedly from God. So it's much trickier for them than it is for Christians, because Christians don't have that notion of a God-given corpus of laws that have come from God. But essentially, that is the framework of international law.
It's interesting because you figure, it kind of draws from the Jewish tradition, and the Jewish tradition is, very much almost like a legal document of, here are the laws, here are the things, here's, what you're supposed to do, and all that kind of jazz. And then, you have the same thing in Islam.
That governs, upholds the notions of human rights and so on to this day.
Tom, when you were talking about the fact that it was a religious movement that spread like wildfire that helped to eradicate, for the British Empire to stop using slaves and to eradicate slavery in the empire, it made me think, and I'm only going to touch on it briefly, with the way that the woke movement talked about slavery and how we were the beneficiary of slavery, which to a certain extent we are. But the way they talked about it was in the form of original sin.
Yes.
We are born into this sin, and we are never going to be washed clean, and it is an indelible stain on our reputation and fundamentally our souls as well.
Well, so I think what happens is that slavery comes to be seen as the great sin. I mean, it's clearly a monstrous, appalling crime, but we judge that by Christian standards. We accept it as an appalling crime because we have bought
Right.
into the assumptions of Las Casas or the Quakers or whatever. It's if you look at the entirety of
And this is the thing that I don't know if like Sam Harris or any of the sort of the new atheist people have ever really, I don't want to say reckoned with, but like really presented a good argument against it, is like there are things like I don't want to say supremacy, the value of a human life being, so incredibly great, more so than, just like the value it can produce from like a utilitarian standpoint. The idea of it being, something sacred. I mean, I've just never seen a really good argument for it that doesn't just like, have at its core a sort of like Christian intuition of, human life being sacred, and, there being some sort of like spark of divine will, some sort of, God is present in every human being. Something along those lines is almost always referred to, but they'll cloak it in the language of like Greek philosophy. It's like, oh, we have a daemon, of the Aristotelian Socratic tradition. We have something along those lines, and that's the thing that makes human life sacred. And it's like, well, that's not how the Greeks looked at it. That's not how they portrayed it. They didn't act like that. They didn't say that. The Christians did. You're just using older terminology that at the time was never thought to be that stuff. Like, because if you're looking at Aristotle, very said like, hey, some people were slaves and these types of things. Like, it was, he did not act in a way that all human life is sacred. He would never have said such a thing.
global history, it's not in any way a moral given. Civilizations have always depended upon the exploitation of the masses, and that could be chattel slavery of the kind that you have in Greece and Rome, and then in the Atlantic in the 18th century, or it could be founded on caste, the idea that certain people are born to be inferior, or it could be upon the exploitation of proletariat, which you get in the 19th century industrial civilization. You always, there is no form of civilization that is not also a reflection of barbarism. Is the kind of the famous quotation. I'm paraphrasing. I can't remember it exactly.
There is no document of civilization which is not at the same time a document of barbarism. By Walter Benjamin, a German philosopher.
Comment. So there's always been exploitation. The idea that slavery is therefore not just an unfortunate corollary of the way of things, but a moral stain that has to be eradicated is very, very novel. And because it happened in a uniquely horrible form in the Atlantic, and because it was Christians who drove that, to a degree it contaminated, I think, the kind of Christian record in the eyes of people who were themselves absolutely saturated with Christian assumptions. And it kind of bled into anti-imperialism, moving into the 20th century. Again, the idea that the powerful countries shouldn't dominate weaker countries. I mean, most the history of the world is basically the record of empires. The idea that empires are problematic, to use favorite phrase of the world, is again a relatively recent one. And it's meant that Christianity, which is
I would agree with
a
that.
universal religion, Christians believe that it's for the good of the world that everyone becomes a Christian. There are more Christians more Christians than any other kind of practicing ideology in the world.
That's true.
That has come to be seen by lots of people as itself evil.
Yeah.
The kind of the evangelical impetus of
patronizing. It's colonizing.
Christianity is seen as, going out and overthrowing the right of the Aztecs to do what they want, even if that is human sacrifice or whatever. And so the consequence of that is that today we remain the heirs of these Christian impulses, the notion that slavery is an evil. But Christianity has been implicated in that, and so therefore the institutional character of Christianity is often rejected as part of the problem, a part of what has to be rejected, even though it is that institutional structure that has provided people with the ideological framework that enables them to judge it as evil. And so I think what you saw in 2020 and its aftermath was a deeply Christian movement. I mean, something that the Quakers in the 18th century would have recognized. The kind of the line of descent from the activism of Quakers in the 18th century is very, very clear. That's what they're doing. But because they have jettisoned the Christian scripture, the Christian practice, the Christian self-identification that had provided structure for the Quakers and the early activists, they essentially have to construct their own traditions. And so that's why you had all the toppling of statues, which is kind of very Protestant thing to do, toppling idols,
unfortunately,
taking the knee, people, offering themselves up for, as penitentials, white people. It's very, very, these are very, very Christian forms of practice. It's just that they have been divorced from the institutional framework that gave them birth, and so how and where they're developing is unclear. And I think that they are clearly mutating.
Interesting. This is kind of like basically almost the inversion of the sort of Nietzschean stuff, where in which people would pretend they would they didn't believe in God. This is like the story. That is repeated a lot in Nietzsche's stuff, which is like these people don't believe God is dead. They don't believe in God, but they act like it. They pretend. They go through the ritual of belief. They go to the ritual of mass. They go to the ritual of Holy Communion, these types of things, but they don't believe it. They don't believe that God is actually there. They don't have him actually in his heart, any of that type of stuff. Versus these, the woke people in the 2020 Summer of Love, all that jazz, they believed it, but all the outward ritual of it is gone. Like they didn't necessarily believe the exact doctrine. The doctrine was gone, but the belief was there, as opposed to the Nietzschean thing, where in which the belief was gone, but the doctrine remained. The doctrine was empty, but it was still being followed. There was no belief. Now we've got the opposite, where it's, the belief is there. They wholeheartedly believe in these ideas and these types of things, but the doctrine of it is gone. They've jettisoned that. So the things that like stem from that belief still happen. The idea of the original sin, the idea of these things being morally reprehensible, and trying to defend the downtrodden against the people that are masters, and these types of things. That is this deeply Christian thing. So it's kind of like it's an interesting inversion of this kind of stuff. It speaks to a lot of like this sort of cyclical nature of culture and Western history.
Very fast, because once you unmoor ideas and stories and traditions from the context that gave them birth, they can mutate very, very quickly.
It's very interesting you mentioned that, because we had a super viral, very popular interview we did with a journalist called Richard Miniter, in which we talked about some of the ideas from Albion Seed, the idea of how the United States became what it became. And one of the things he explained to us, I think this may have been off camera, was how many of these woke ideas originate from the very areas of America where the Quakers would have.
Yeah.
once settled. Very interesting. But moving on, Tom, one of the other grey religions that I think we are incredibly uneducated about, and I speak for myself above anyone else here in the Western world particularly, is Islam. And it's becoming a bigger conversation politically and societally because of immigration policy, because the number of Muslim followers of Islam in the Western world is growing. And I'd love to know more about how that religion came into being, what are its core values, what are its principles. You mentioned some of them already, but can you expand on that?
Could I just, before I do that, just put Islam in the context of the kind of the Christian story,
of course,
as manifested in the present West? Because I think that's important to understand why there are tensions between Islam and...
It took you an hour to get into it. This is the first thing you led with in the intro to your thing. It took you an hour to get into it.
Is a concept of the secular. And this goes right the way back to ultimately, I mean, you can trace it to the story of Jesus being asked whether taxes should be paid to Caesar. You know, he's famously asked for a coin, and there's the picture of Caesar, and he says, "Whose head is this?" And he says, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's." And so that sense that there is...
You're talking about the separation of what the Americans call church and state.
And they and we call it here church and state. You know, the notion of church and state, there isn't synagogue and state, there isn't mosque and state, it's church and state. And in the West, that's because this notion of there being two rival orders gets enshrined by the towering theological genius in the Latin church. Augustine, great in North Africa in the late 4th, early 5th century AD. And this is against the backdrop of the collapse of Roman power. Rome has been sacked. And there are Romans who say, this is because we have rejected the old order, the old customs that enabled us to keep the gods on side. So, you know, going back to that stuff I was saying about Athens, these rituals, these festivals are like kind of insurance payments to keep the gods happy. And now we've abandoned these. And the Romans call these religiones. So a sacrifice or a festival in honor of a god is a religio. It's a bond that joins you to...
Because religion comes from the term ligure. I'm probably mispronouncing that. But yeah, it means like ligament. It's the thing that binds you. That's what religion is. It binds people.
To a god, and is a kind of guarantee that this god will then look after the city. And these religiones have been abandoned. And Augustine says, no, not a bit of it. And the reason for that is that everything in the fallen world is bound upon what he calls the cyculum, which is basically the span of human life. But it means the notion that everything is doomed to pass away. All things must pass, as George Harrison would put it. And he says that this is true of empires as well as of individuals. Rome is not permanent. Rome has no special significance. It will pass away. It is bound upon the cyculum. If you want eternity, you must bind yourself to the pure eternity of heaven. That's what the real religio is. And it's only the church that can give you this religio. So there you have, as the Roman Empire falls, this notion of there being an order of the cyculum, the order of religio. And over the course of medieval history, this becomes institutionalized. And going into the kind of the Reformation and into modernity, it mutates to become this idea that there is this space called the secular, which is kind of neutral. It's separated from what has come to be called religion. And this is a mad idea. No other culture has ever had this idea. So when you read about ancient Greek religion, they had no concept of religion, and they certainly had no concept of religion as being something that is separate from the kind of the everything else. It's the relationship of people to the gods is
there's a really cool line of this in Rome. Maybe I'll even try to find this. There's a good line. Rome. Trick of procedure. Let me see if I can find this. Rome, trick of procedure. Let's try Cicero, HBO. Let me see if I can find it. Public Enemy. Maybe. Yeah. This is it.
That is so. Juno Inferno session
was not formally ended. Correct.
Correct. So, when we reconvene, it will formally be the same session. The Tribune Antony may use veto on the motion.
Yes.
That is so. Juno Inferno. Senile old fool.
Yeah.
Only say so to begin with. Mark Antony.
No, it's not that. Where is it? Not heard, not fully admitted. I do not wish.
Important
There
as
it
this
is.
should stand on a mere trick of procedure. Trick, you say? This is a religious matter.
Yeah. That's a good, yeah, like, you know, the people writing that stuff understood this. They got it. There's no such thing as religion, you know, like this is a legal trick, this is a trick of procedure. It's like, no. This thing happens the way that it happens because the gods will it so.
It's like the gin in a tonic. You can't separate out the gin and the tonic. What Christianity does is to say, yeah, you can have gin and here's the tonic and you can separate them out. That's the madness of the way that we conceptualize the world in the West. And Islam has no concept that you can separate this out. And so this means, therefore, that what we have in the West is an idea that you have freedom of religion. And Jews in the 19th century had freedom of religion in the wake of the French Revolution. They are told, you know, you can practice your religion as you want. Jews didn't have religion. They were a people. But they're being told, if you want to become the citizens of the French Republic, that's brilliant. But you can no longer define yourself as a citizen of Israel. You know, you are now a French citizen who practices what comes to be called Judaism as a religion. And so Jews in the 19th and
Seriously, is it that late?
In the 20th century have to adapt their traditions to fit this very specific modern Western secular template. And Western secular democracies require Muslims to do the same. To conceptualize what they belong to as being a religion. But classically, that's not how Muslims understood it. Islam is a totalizing way of leading your life.
That's true.
There are rules that govern every aspect of your existence. God is manifest in everything that you do. The idea that there are kind of safe spaces where everyone can meet up and kind of join in a secular space is something completely alien. And I don't think that most.
So I wonder if you would say that Judaism has a concept of the secular. I mean, you figure a lot of, you know, Judaism nowadays, even like Israel, you figure, because a lot of, you know, Israeli stuff comes from, you know, a Western tradition. It is like a Western democracy, blah, blah, blah. You wonder if they have that concept of it. Because, I mean, they've certainly, you know, 200 years is plenty enough time for culture to adapt to these types of things, and to inculcate it into their, you know, religion, their culture, their, however you want to describe it. So if that's the case, then you would have to ask yourself, I wonder if, you know, there was, I mean, certainly it seems like this guy's making the argument, historically speaking, Christianity is the only place that does this. It's the only religion that does this, has, you know, a separation between, you know, church and state. Has a separation between the secular and the religious. And if that's the case, then I guess you'd say Judaism doesn't have that. Or didn't have that. Maybe it does now. Maybe it's been, you know, long enough. As opposed to Islam, it's not the case.
Kind of enthusiasts for liberal secularism understand this. They tend to, I think they think that the notion of the secular is something that is common to everybody. That it's kind of like, you know, everyone has a sense of what a tree is, everyone has a sense of what a dog is, everyone has a sense of what the secular is. They don't. And so Muslims are being forced, when they come to the West, are being forced into this kind of Procrustean bed of the secular notion of what a religion is.
The only reason I keep trying to interject is I'm trying always to convert what you're saying into simpler, more easier to understand language. And I guess what you're saying is the central tension there is, theologically speaking, Islam doesn't allow the separation of politics and Islam. If you are a Muslim,
right?
Well, classically, it hasn't.
That's why I said theologically speaking, there are of course individual people who are able to do so, but within the way that the religion is, if you follow that faith, then that faith controls everything. It controls the way you participate in society, the way you live your life, and the way you might vote in a society. Your loyalty will be to that above other things. Is that fair summation? Ought to be according to the doctrine. All right, people, it's trivia time. Financial trivia. Back the like always your cards your life.
It is the seal of the prophets. He has brought God's last message, and the Quran is a record of humanity's disobedience to prophets. Prophets arrive, they reveal God's wishes, they then ignore it, or they corrupt God's message, or whatever, and so more prophets have to come. Muhammad is the last prophet. He and what he teaches mankind is mankind's last hope. If Islam goes, then mankind is doomed. Everyone will go to hell. So it's absolutely, existential stakes. And the proof that that Islam is true, again, classically, is that Islam is triumphant for most of its existence. I mean, it pulverizes the Sasanian Empire.
That is definitely, and that is literally, if you watch like a documentary on Islam made by like Muslims and these types of things, that is apparently the thing that they will say, like, yeah, these are the miracles that are attributed to Muhammad are not, changing water into wine. They're not bringing the dead back. They're not healing things. It's this person won battles. This person won, this battle that was, should have lost. That's the, those are the miracles.
It's members of the Roman Empire, conquers vast swathes of the Christian world, the kind of ancient Christian heartlands of Mediterranean Christianity. And it's really only with Napoleon's invasion of Egypt at the very end of the 18th century that Muslim powers are suddenly brought up against the fact that the despised Christian powers are incredibly powerful. And over the course of the 19th into the 20th century, most Muslim powers come under either the direct or the indirect hegemony of Christian Western powers. And so that's a massive shock, and it requires a recalibration of what Islam is. I mean, the attitude to slavery would be a classic example. The reason that the Sultan in Constantinople is willing to contemplate banning the slave trade, even though it had been legitimized by the fact that Muhammad had slaves and that the early caliphs, they were all in favor of slavery. They thought it was brilliant, and that it's mandated in Islamic scriptures. The only reason he was willing to do that was that he needed the help of the British and the French in the Crimean War against the Russians, and so he essentially kind of employed his top scholars to try and work out a way in which this Islamic law could be squared with this radical new notion. And this has been part of the kind of the great trauma for Muslims in the modern world, is how do you adapt it? And essentially what Muslims did was to kind of Protestantize themselves. So they slightly adopted the sense that it's in the heart. It may say this in the Quran: go out and crucify people who are offenders against God. But what that actually means is that you should try and be kind to them.
That makes sense. Which is why the sort of like the Wahhabist stuff is like a return to, no, it's literal. It is what it says it is.
It's that's the kind of it's the
So this is the people who say jihad is the internal
jihad
struggle.
Which it kind I mean that is a part of it, but it's not
the entirety of it.
It absolutely is not part of it. But yes, absolutely. And so you have the you look at your heart, and therefore you can adjust and adapt the legacy of Islamic scripture for the modern world. Get on the right side of history, all these kind of very Protestant ideas. Or the counter reaction to that is again a very Protestant one, which is to go fundamentalist, because in 20th century Protestantism, you have Protestants who were faced with Darwin and all this kind of stuff. And they say we've got to go back and interpret the scriptures literally, which neither Christians or Muslims had ever really done. They have very, very sophisticated, complicated, almost poetic understanding of the scriptures. But fundamentalist Protestants were saying, well, what does the Bible say? It's inerrant. That's what we're going to do. And so Muslims also have adopted that policy. And the consequence of that has been a kind of very brutal understanding of Islam, because there's quite a lot in the Quran and in the Hadiths and in the life of Muhammad that, if interpreted in a kind of brutally literal way, sanctions quite a lot of bloodshed.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the problem.
Well, quite. And this is so informative, Tom. I'm so glad we're talking about this, because I'm really keen to understand this from a deep perspective. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about in this context is, how is there a unique challenge for Islam to, you call it Protestantize itself, which is to start to develop an interpretation that's more compatible with modern reality, for a number of reasons. One of them being the Quran is the literal word of God and the last word of God. This is kind of the problem. You can't have a reformation if this is it, right? Like you can't challenge any of it.
I think Islam is uniquely indigestible for a secular mindset. And people don't want to admit that, in a way, because there's a default to some.
I was going to say that because it challenges the idea of, this Christian intuition you have.
Assumption that secular civilization can swallow anything up. There's a kind of arrogance there. The secular civilization of the West is such a broad tent that everyone can be brought into it. But Islam is at least as sophisticated a civilization as the civilization of the Christian West, and a very ancient one, and for most of its existence has been much, much more powerful than the Christian world. And
is that true? I don't know if that's, I don't know if that's true. Yeah, much, much more powerful. Certainly there's definitely an era of, where Islamic sciences were, the envy of the world. They were the most advanced culture. That's definitely true for, a large period of time. Certainly they did very well in terms of like conquering and taking territory. That's true. But I don't know if you would say, for the majority of its history. I'm not sure if that's true. Maybe half.
Therefore, the idea that
what did you say again?
The Christian West, and a very ancient one, and for most of its existence has been much, much more powerful than the Christian.
I don't know about much, much more powerful. And a majority, maybe like 51% majority. I wouldn't say, I think you might be glazing a bit hard.
World. And therefore the idea that it should accommodate itself to what liberal secularists think it should do isn't a given. So Muslims in a country like Britain have freedom of religion, but there are lots of Muslims who do not see Islam as a religion because they see religion as a Christian category. Islam is much more than a religion. It's something that saturates every aspect of existence, and therefore they don't necessarily want that. They want to live in a world where, as has traditionally been the case, Islam is everywhere. But that is obviously something that the liberal state is not prepared to offer. So there are limits to what secularism and liberalism can and will offer.
So what's the obvious question is, and I mean, it's probably an unfair question to ask a historian, but where's this going?
I don't know.
There you go. Yeah,
I'm not a prophet,
Christian,
unlike Muhammad. I mean, my guess is that Islam, rather in the way that Judaism has done, will accommodate itself to the host society. I mean, that's traditionally what happens, but that there will
Depends.
always be kickback because of what makes.
Well, it depends. I mean, it depends. I mean, because you figure at a point in terms of like, you know, populational density, I don't think there was ever a place where, you know, Judaism, you know, Jewish people, you know, outnumbered Christians in Christian societies. I don't know if that's ever the case, as opposed to, you know, because there was never that many Jewish people, you know, extant in the world. It was never a hugely large religion in terms of like, you know, percentages of populations, you know, per capita stuff. As opposed to Islam, there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of Muslims out there. There's a ton of them. And if they're all coming to, you know, one country, you could absolutely throw it off where it's like, okay, if you're not going, and I mean, this is the argument. If you're not going to assimilate, okay, but, you know, if you're not going to do it and there's more and more people and you're able to create, you know, an enclave, you're able to create, you know, a pocket society where in which you're just, you know, doing your own thing, there's no reason to accommodate to the host nation because you've created your own nation inside of another one.
Islam distinctive. And also, obviously, the more Muslims there are, the more weight their voices will have. And so the more under pressure the kind of the secular assumptions of the West will come. And I don't quite know, I don't know where that will go.
So he said the same thing.
I mean, the worry for a lot of people.
He says the same thing, but his prediction is, no, it'll be fine.
It's not necessarily Islam. It's that kind of very hard extremist edge of Islam that we see in this country. And if you go, will that remain? Will it ever be weathered? I mean, these are impossible questions to ask because I think that's a worry for a lot of people, Tom. Is that
I think it is.
And if there's no reformation possible, then is this just a continuation?
Well, I mean, I think Islam, to a degree, has had a reformation because the reformation is all about going back to scripture and getting rid of the kind of accretion of what's seen as superstition. And Islam has repeatedly been to reform Islam. And so certainly, you know, the ideologues of the Islamic State would say that they were reformers. That's why they, for instance, completely dismiss any notion of international law. It's why they dismiss notions of human rights. It's why they think that slavery shouldn't just be allowed, but should be positively encouraged because it's in the Quran, and therefore, if you want to be true to God's message, you should have slavery. I mean, that's a very, very radical minority position, but it is an example of
we're losing it. Losing the stream.
The direction of travel that a certain understanding of the Islamic inheritance
See if we can check it
lead
out.
people.
It's going back, okay.
And it's, you know, of course it's a worry.
But I find this conversation very valuable, actually, because what you are actually explaining, that even people who go, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in Jesus Christ, I reject all of that. But you are still a product of Christianity.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're not even a product of Christianity. You're basically like, that atheism only exists in Christianity.
And as a result of that, you look at the world, whether you accept it or not, through Christian eyes.
Yes.
And I don't think that people quite understand what that means, particularly when we look at religions like Islam, or we look at other cultures and we're like, we're all the same.
Yeah.
We're not.
Well, so that is, I mean, that is the foundational principle of whatever our new religion is. This kind of this gelded, mutated, be kind, isn't Paddington wonderful kind of post-Christianity that remains the kind of the dominant ideology. And I would say that the paradigmatic pulpit that this religion has is Thought for the Day on Radio 4's Today program, where you will have Catholic priests.
Yeah, I don't know what any of this is.
And
UK
Anglican bishops and rabbis and Islamic scholars and Sikhs and Hindus, all preaching exactly the same message.
Yeah.
You know, one will give it a little bit of garnishing from the Gospels, one from the Quran, one from the Bhagavad Gita or whatever. But basically, it's the same core message. And the idea, you know, and this is.
And what is that message? Be kind, diversity.
Be kind. It's brilliant. Yes,
Yeah.
we're all basically the same. There are many routes to God. There are many
Is that all
paths
true,
up the
though?
mountain.
Isn't that all true?
No, I don't think it's remotely true. I think that. I think that.
It's like the first, like, definitive kind of prickly statement he's made.
What the study of history reveals, and it's why it's so fascinating, is the infinite number of ways there are to be human, and the infinite number of ways there are to order a society, and that at any given time, the majority of people who live in a particular place at a particular time will assume that their way of doing things is obviously the standard way of doing it. Why wouldn't you do it? And that's as true of Athenians in 5th century Athens as it is of us today in 21st century Britain. We just assume that the way we see the world is the way that the world is, but it clearly isn't. And you just have to look at the world through the eyes of, I don't know, Protestants in the 18th century, or Muslims in the 14th century, or Aztecs in the 15th century, to realize and to try and see the world through their eyes, and to realize how relative one's own cultural assumptions are.
I mean, it's a very powerful point. I guess the next logical question is, we've got this new religion, whatever this is, as you've said yourself.
This kind of hits a little bit differently in the wake of the Charlie Kirk stuff. That point of, no, you know, we're not the same. Everything is very different. People are, you know, hugely, you know, can be massively, enormously different based on their cultural context, where, you know, where they live, when they live. It's a hugely different thing. So what are you gonna do about it?
But to me, it doesn't seem more a religion. It seems kind of a mishmash of ideologies with no real.
That is what religions are.
I take.
You know, that's.
But there is.
That's fair. You got me.
But there is no God, and what I was trying to say is doesn't seem to be a core. And I guess my question.
So it's floating away.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is, unpleasant as it may seem, is can society last without this core to it?
We will find out. I mean, I would say
that's an optimistic answer.
There we go.
Say that there are. I mean, that there are many paths, and many paths that our society will take, because it's fracturing in all kinds of ways. You know, there are many different perspectives, and those aren't just political; they're cultural, or all kinds of ways. But I would say that, say for Britain, this ancient Christian country. One
For Britain, you're screwed. No, hopefully not. I don't want you to be, but it's not looking good.
One path is that this kind of post-Christian Paddingtonism, if you want to call it that, it's like the head of the rocket. It's gone through the atmosphere. Everything else underneath.
Right.
I
got you.
Now it's got the power to blast through the solar system, and all that kind of all the stuff that's been jettisoned is all the nonsense about the Bible and Jesus and the church.
It's just baggage.
We don't need. It's just baggage. It's gone. It's drifted. It's detritus. We have now blasted out, and we're going forward. And the secular principles, the liberal principles, are sufficiently self-evidently right and good that it will sustain the future evolution and development of our society for decades and centuries to come, and therefore, you know, it's culturally determined. I mean, it's
okay. So I will say, just I like his analogy. I don't think he totally understands the physics of space travel, because essentially he might be right. It's good. It's going. You know, it'll keep going. The problem is that if it keeps going, you have no more stuff to, you know, expel, you have no maneuvering thrusters. You can keep going on the same exact trajectory. And eventually, even though space is very empty and all these types of things, eventually, if it keeps going, it will eventually hit something. It will eventually, you know, be brought back. And anything that it brings back, it's not going to be able to correct against. It's going to be, you know, it's essentially, yeah, if you've totally, you know, blasted away all of your fuel, it's all gone. Even in space where there's nothing inherently pulling you down, of course there always will be some things, because you're going to be, you know, like there's moons, there's gravity, you know, there's other rocks that's going to steal velocity from you, and you know there will be a slow deceleration. You're not going to be able to resist anything that's pushing against you. Anything pushing against you is just stealing velocity that you're never getting back. So you're essentially always going to be limited, and it's always going to, you know, you're only going to go so far. Eventually you're going to hit something, you're going to hit a rock, and then it's done, you're out, you're over. You're going to, you know, slow down because of the slow accretion of forces onto you. And, you know, eventually it's not good. So it's, you know, I like his analogy. I think it's more apt than he understands.
It's clearly derives from Christianity, but you don't need Christianity anymore to kind of provide the rocket fuel. It's going on its own way. Another option, which the history of the 20th century suggests, is that the default assumption among humans is that strength and might is right. Power does have a glamour, and this is what Nietzsche predicted. You know, he said when Christianity goes, there will be this great convulsion, and there will, you know, will be terrifying powers will emerge. And of course, he was right, because they emerged in the form of fascism, and fascism and Nazism cast such a shadow over us that
it's not wrong.
We've lived in their shadow. In a way, one of the reasons I think for the decline of institutional Christianity is that Hitler has taken the place of the devil, and that a modern liberal now, rather than ask what would Jesus do, as his Victorian forebear would have done, says what would Hitler do, and does the opposite. And that's kind of kept us on our liberal straight and narrow. But that is clearly fading as the experience of fascism becomes in Europe dies out, lived experience of it. So the kind of the bogeyman power of Hitler will fade.
Plus the just absolute dilution of the words and meanings, and the punch and zip of Nazi and fascist in these things. They've been overused to the point where they're meaningless now.
And people who are no longer bounded by Christian inhibitions or assumptions, I can imagine them turning around and saying, well, what's wrong with... why shouldn't I do what I like? I'm very rich, I'm very powerful. Why shouldn't I do exactly what I like? And it's not obvious what the answer to that is, I think, if you don't have the kind of the Christian answers. And I suppose a third possibility is that people will return to the source and say, well, actually, maybe I am Christian. Maybe maybe I should take this a bit more seriously than I have been.
Which we do
and there are I think tentative signs that might be happening.
There is, yeah. I would say more than tentative. That seems to be the one that people are going towards. That seems to be the one that people are trying to adopt, because the other two, it dies out, terrible forces, Nazism, fascism, been done, been tried, been brought down. So that didn't work. Could be that, there's more stuff going on, but it seems like that's been tried, failed, abandoned. I mean, I guess maybe you'd say communism and these types of things, but it's sort of the same thing. The first option I also don't find useful because of the same thing. I'm like, the idea that it's just going to go on, you're going to, you've lost the core of Christianity, but the good stuff that we found in it is just going to keep continuing, or we're good to go with it, and it'll never be brought down for the reasons that I explained in the analogy. I don't think that's going to work. So I think probably your third option is really the only thing that's going to work. Yeah, it's going to be one or three.
What's fascinating is I would argue there are signs of all three of those things happening.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, and that's what I'm saying is that all of these things might be happening.
They
and
are.
of course, we will also have the growth of Islam, so that also provides a fourth option. And quite how all these different traditions will cope with each other. I mean, it's going to be interesting.
But doesn't it also?
You seem very excited about this for reasons that are beyond.
I think we're living.
He's
through
old.
one
He's
of
going to
the-
You're
die.
going to get some fascists. You're going to get the rise of Islam. You're going to get these woke idiots running around ruining everything. And what was the other one? Oh, the resurgence of Christianity. I think that's the one I'm
I think
most happy
I think
with.
we are
Right.
we are living through a great choke point in the history of this country and of this continent more generally.
And Western civilization. Huh?
Yeah,
There you go.
absolutely. And you know, in British terms of British history, we've had periods where the culture of, say, just looking specifically at England, has radically changed. So the Norman Conquest, the Reformation, the Industrial Revolution. I think that we are on the verge of going through something similar.
I would
now.
agree.
Brilliant.
And I don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, people in 1790, looking at Birmingham or Manchester, would have had no idea where that was going. But everything changed, and maybe we're going through something. We're on the verge of going through something similar now.
I agree.
Well, at least you said it with a smile on your face, Tom.
It's not, I'm not that
But I was
tired.
going to say
All
just
right.
one thing. Doesn't this talk about an arrogance of our culture? Where
But all cultures are arrogant.
Right. I was going to say that.
Well,
they are. But
they should
are
be.
we especially
You're not.
arrogant to think we can divorce
No,
society?
that's your arrogance showing, mate.
Yes.
Am I not really special about thinking I'm special?
Yeah, I am special. The mother said so, but no, she didn't. But I was going to say,
Explains the comedy career, mate.
but thinking that we can, surely aren't we the only society that has ever thought we can divorce culture and religion?
Yes.
And
We
is
are.
is that
Yikes.
not arrogant?
Yeah, it is arrogant, but the arrogance, people would say that's justified because of the fact that we
It
have
worked.
the most. We're the products of an incredibly advanced civilization that industrialized, and therefore, basically, we've got the answer. And I think obviously that now rubs up against all kinds of anxieties about Western exceptionalism. But I think it does. The idea
Not
that,
really.
Our secular liberal society is uniquely advanced. I mean, to be progressive is itself a very Western thing. And if you're progressive, you're progressing ahead of everybody else. I mean, a sense of arrogance is baked into that word, I would argue.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's going to be a very interesting
That's
time.
definitely true.
Tom, thank you so much. It's always such a pleasure speaking with you. We're going to ask you a bunch of questions from our supporters, which they've submitted. But before we do, what's the one thing that we're not talking about that we really should be?
Before Tom answers a final question, he'll be able to get his
I can't, bro. I'm sorry.
changed his mind about during his career.
Have you talked about the cultural and social significance of sport on your?
We have not.
No.
I think that because we've just had this incredible climax to a cricket series, and I went on.
Okay, sports. I'll
this
give
morning
him a
to
minute.
talk about it, and was reminded. I went to the Oval yesterday where it was played, and the sense of tension was unbearable. And I'd been through this quarter-final in the Champions League where Villa, who we were talking about earlier, had played against PSG,
What?
and that also had been so excruciating. And
Dear
I realised that these are the two moments where I have lived most fully this year. And that is, I am just one person among millions, perhaps billions, who share in experiences like that. And it is obviously part of an enormous, vast, global, industrialized construct. I mean, it's enormous. And
Sport.
the way that this has evolved, the fact that we take it for granted, it suddenly struck me, this is very odd. This is something I've always taken for granted that actually is very, very strange and unusual. So maybe something on that.
Excellent. Head on over.
Sports. I mean, yeah, kind of. But also, No. I mean, it's fun. It's fun that, you know, that's come up. That's the answer he came up with. But I don't know. It's an interesting little thing. I don't know if it's, you know, important. All right, with that being said, thank you very much for all your time and attention. Good luck in all your endeavors. I'll say farewell for now.